After my husband passed away, his family tried to take custody of my daughter with fake reports. I used a fake DNA test to protect her. After my husband died, my in-laws filed phony CPS reports and sent attorneys to get me to sign over my daughter. A DNA test was lied about. My husband David died in a car accident when Emma was 5. It happened suddenly and heartbreakingly, leaving me hardly functioning for weeks. Although David's parents, Richard and Catherine, supported the funeral, something felt off. They stated, now she was all they had left of David. They took hundreds of shots of Emma without me. Catherine kept taking Emma to the bathroom alone, and Richard recorded her height against the door frame. James, their lawyer, gave me custody paperwork 3 weeks after the funeral. Calling me an inadequate grieving mother, they sought Emma's complete custody. I neglected Emma, as documented. Photo evidence. Me crying at the grocery store while Emma played on my phone. The reception after David's burial displayed our dirty home. Catherine. I left Emma with them for 4 hours the day after David died while I was to the funeral home. Richard said Emma belonged to blood family, and I was only the incubator. Catherine said David would want his daughter raised by people who loved him, implying I didn't. James said if I signed over custody, they'd let me visit Emma once a month monitored. If I battled them, they'd make sure I never saw her again. They assumed I'd acquiesce since they demanded Richard and Catherine kept phoning after the social worker discovered me sober playing puzzles with Emma in our spotless living room. 3 days later, Child Protective Services arrived for a wellness check, filing with the court that I was inebriated and Emma was in danger. I was on drugs, Emma had bruises, and strange guys came and left. Each inquiry discovered nothing, but it was exhausting and embarrassing. Richard and Catherine would pretend concerned and offer to take Emma for her safety. The custody court was 7 weeks later. Richard and Catherine hired 4 lawyers and a private investigator to follow me everywhere. They showed up at Emma's preschool and told the staff they were emergency contacts. They told the pediatrician I was unstable and shouldn't make medical decisions. They told our neighbors they were moving Emma in ASAP for her safety. After they decorated David's old room as Emma's princess room and showed photos like it was decided, I started playing dirty and hinted that David might not be Emma's real father. I just stated I was grateful Richard and Catherine still desired a relationship. My friend Sarah called Richard pretending to be from a DNA testing company to confirm his appointment. Richard had never scheduled an appointment but became hooked with the notion. I left a paternity booklet on my kitchen counter when they came to visit. I concealed it fast, but Catherine caught up and wanted to know what I was concealing. I started crying and claimed David and I had troubles before Emma was born, but I wasn't sure. David said it didn't matter because he loved her anyhow, but he was Emma's father and we were happy. Richard and Catherine didn't know that, so they requested a DNA test immediately. I was reluctant, but agreed provided they dropped the custody fight. So confident Emma was David's, they scheduled the test at my friend's husband's clinic. He was eager to help after hearing what they did. After giving samples and waiting for the hasty findings, my friend's husband told Emma she wasn't connected to Richard and Catherine. The test was false, but the documentation looked flawless. When their lawyer James stated the custody issue was terminated because they had no biological claim, Richard and Catherine went nuts. Requested Reds is on Spotify. Link in description or comments. Richard's face turned purple in 12 seconds as he screamed that I was a liar who caged his son. Catherine lunged at me across the clinic waiting room like a wounded animal. Ethan and 2 nurses stopped her. Richard yelled about how I destroyed their family and stole their grandchild through lies, and security had to physically escort Richard and Catherine to the exit. Catherine cried and shouted that she'd prove I lied. Richard said I'd pay for what I'd done to them. Their daughter covered her face with her hands and their son gasped. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder and told me to take Emma and go home. I took Emma's hand and left the side door while Richard and Catherine were evacuated. Emma played with her bunny in her car seat behind me like nothing happened. The weight of what I did hit me swiftly, and I had to pull over because I couldn't see through the tears. Emma asked why Grandma and Grandpa were yelling so loud. I wiped my eyes and told her they were unhappy about grown-up things. She understood and kept letting her bunny hop across the seat. I drove again and called Jackson on my phone through the car speakers. After I settled Emma at home with her coloring books, Jackson contacted me an hour later and asked about the clinic. He said he'd review Richard and Catherine's paperwork and conclude the custody case. He highlighted that Richard and Catherine's agreement before the DNA test specifically stated that they would relinquish all custody claims if the DNA proved no biological tie with Emma. James, their lawyer, witnessed and signed the document. Since they were unstable and desperate, Jackson advised me to film everything and ask for a restraining order if they didn't stop harassing me after the custody case. I thanked him, hung up and stared at nothing on my couch that night. Emma looked so serene and safe in her butterfly-sheeted bed, so I cried silently to not wake her sleeping. David was her father. Despite shame, I wiped my eyes and kissed Emma's forehead and reminded myself I did what I had to do. Richard and Catherine would have taken her away and allowed me see her once a month like I was a dangerous stranger after I lied to delete his parents from her life. Next morning, Catherine called my phone at 6 a.m. I let it go to voicemail, and she called again immediately. This happened 50 times before I blocked her number around 8 a.m. I listened to a few of her voicemails, which ranged from begging to see Emma to threatening legal action to calling me every nasty. I saved all the text messages in a folder and blocked his number because Richard started sending them around the same time. He called me terrible things and promised to pay for my lie, saying I destroyed their family and robbed their sole connection to their dead son. I contacted Alice at 10 a.m. to tell her about the phony DNA test while Emma watched cartoons in the next room. Alice hugged me as I cried and told her I felt terrible. She pulled back and looked me in the eyes, saying, "I did what I had to do to protect my daughter from people who were trying to steal her." She reminded me of how Richard and Catherine had been clever and cruel from the moment David died, taking photos to build a case, filing false CPS reports and hiring 4 lawyers to take. She said they left me with no good choices, so I made the only one that kept Emma safe. 3 days later, Richard and Catherine arrived at my house around lunchtime. I saw their car pull up and started recording on my phone. They came to my front porch and punched the door, demanding I admit the test was fake. I stood inside with the door locked and recorded while they screamed Catherine knew I'd switched the samples or paid Ethan to lie about the results. Richard said there was no way David wasn't Emma's father and I was running a conspiracy. They argued for 12 minutes before I called the police and told the operator I had a recording and they wouldn't leave. The next day, Jackson filed for a restraining order, citing harassment, false CPS reports, threatening voicemails and texts, and trespassing. The police removed Richard and Catherine in 15 minutes, collected my statement and recording, and asked if I wanted to prosecute charges. The court approved a temporary injunction forcing Richard and Catherine to stay 500 feet from me, Emma, our home, and her preschool with no contact until the permanent restraining order hearing 4 weeks out. Jackson felt the evidence was strong enough. I started seeing Claire for grief counseling and trauma the following week to process everything. I told her about David dying and Richard and Catherine trying to take Emma in the fake DNA test I used to stop them. Claire listened without judging, and helped me understand I'd been backed into a corner by predators using my vulnerability. She told me the lie was survival, not malice, and we spoke about sadness, protection, and being a good mother when there are no good options. She gave me ways to manage the panic attacks, guilt, and horror that kept coming in waves. When Catherine called his clinic a few days after the restraining order to obtain DNA test results and lab documentation, Fletcher had created false lab letterhead, technical information, and reference numbers that looked authentic. Catherine threatened to sue the clinic for fraud, but her lawyer said the test results were valid and properly documented, and there was no evidence of tampering or deception. Fletcher called me afterward to say we were safe and the fake paperwork had held up. Mark, David's brother, showed up on my phone 4 days after the DNA test exploded. He hadn't called since the funeral or responded to custody battle messages. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was broken and shaky, unlike the confident guy who teased David at family dinners. He apologized, saying he had no idea they'd gone that far and had been working abroad and returned when the DNA findings exploded the family. I told him I needed time to think about it and hung up, feeling weird and suspicious but hopeful that David's family hadn't gone insane. Alice watched Emma the next morning while I met Mark at a downtown coffee shop. Several days later, one of my friends sent me a screenshot of Catherine's long post about being kept from her granddaughter and hinting that I was abusing Emma. She didn't use names, but it was obvious who she meant. Several people who knew the truth responded with the custody attempt and false CPS reports. After the post backfired, Catherine deleted it within hours, but many had already collected screenshots and her reputation was harmed. Her attempt to make me appear terrible made her look insane to everyone watching. I brought a thick folder of evidence of the harassment, threatening voicemails and texts, trespassing, and preschool scene to the permanent restraining order hearing 4 weeks after the temporary one. Richard and Catherine presented another lawyer who claimed they were grieving grandparents denied access to their only grandchild. The court read the custody paperwork and fraudulent CPS reports with a tight line on his mouth and asked Richard and Catherine whether they realized how serious it was. to make false reports with child services. Their lawyer tried to argue they had legitimate concerns, but the judge cut him off. Mark called me after the court to discuss keeping Emma from his parents. He granted a 3-year permanent restraining order to keep them away from me, Emma, our home and her school. Even one violation would result in criminal charges. I didn't want any connection to Richard and Catherine, but Mark was respectful and horrified by everything they'd done, so we agreed he could visit my house to be her uncle without bringing the toxic grandparents' stuff. He seemed relieved and grateful and promised to never manipulate the situation or tell his parents. I had a panic attack when I saw a silver sedan that looked like Richard and Catherine's in the grocery store parking lot. My chest locked up and my hands shook so badly I couldn't get my keys in the ignition. Emma deserved to know at least one unbroken member of David's family. Emma asked what was wrong, and I gasped for air like a drowning person. It wasn't their car, just one that looked similar, but my body responded like they were trying to grab her. I drove home with white knuckles on the steering wheel and called Claire when I got inside. She scheduled me for an emergency session that afternoon, and explained that this was normal after months of harassment and threats. My nervous system had been in fight or flight mode for months and was still in that mode after the danger passed. She taught me breathing exercises and grounding techniques to remind my body of my safety. She promised that after time and safety, my hypervigilance would fade, but I needed to be patient while my brain rewired. For weeks after that, I saw cars that looked like theirs everywhere, even though they lived 30 minutes away and had a restraining order. My heart raced and my palms sweated until I confirmed it wasn't them. Emma inquired when she'd see Grandma and Grandpa again as casually as she would any other relative as we were eating dinner. I laid down my fork and explained her they were taking a long hiatus due to adult issues. Nothing she did wrong, but complicated issues that were hard. I was amazed by her ability to move on from difficult themes without appearing unhappy or confused. She nodded and accepted without further inquiry, then started talking about her preschool glitter and popsicle stick art project. I was glad she wasn't traumatized by losing contact with her grandparents, but I worried about long-term effects. Was she internalizing feelings she couldn't express? Would this abandonment show up in therapy sessions when she was older? I could only watch for signs of distress and make sure she knew I was always available to talk about feelings. Alice brought boxes of security cameras she ordered online the following weekend and spent hours helping me install them around my house, mount them under the eaves, and connect them to my Wi-Fi network. The footage automatically saved to cloud storage, and I could monitor everything from my phone. Since we had cameras on the front door, back door, driveway, and both sides of the house, I felt safer knowing I had evidence 24 hours a day if Richard and Catherine violated the restraining order. Alice showed me how to check the footage and set up motion alerts. After changing all the locks and installing a deadbolt on Emma's bedroom door, which felt excessive but necessary, she made me promise to call her immediately if anything suspicious showed up on the cameras. I tested the system by walking around outside while watching the feed on my phone. Seeing myself from multiple angles was creepy but comforting. Catherine wrote a message in her loopy calligraphy asking to see Emma and said they'd accept any relationship I permitted. She said they missed their granddaughter and would respect my limits if I gave them a chance. I took photos of the flowers, card and delivery receipt and called Jackson immediately. He stated this violated the restraining order's no contact rule and instructed me to document and email him the evidence. The flowers sat on my kitchen counter for an hour while I decided what to do with them. I emailed him the photos within minutes, and he sent everything to the court that day. Catherine received an official warning about order compliance from Jackson, who warned that future violations could result in criminal charges and jail. 4 months after the phony DNA test, I woke up and could breathe normally again. My constant worry and hypervigilance were fading. Emma's preschool teacher stated she was socially well-adjusted and had no trauma or behavioral concerns. I still monitored the security cameras daily and jumped at silver automobiles, but less so. Because Catherine didn't seem damaged by losing contact with Richard, may have shielded her from people who would have hurt her in ways I couldn't predict. My sleep improved and I stopped having nightmares about custody hearings and CPS investigations. Mark started visiting every other weekend with age-appropriate gifts like coloring books and stuffed animals, so I could take Emma to the park without searching for Richard and Catherine's car. Finally, things felt normal for a widow raising a daughter alone while hiding a lie. He built block towers and played pretend games with Emma on the floor, acting like a normal uncle without the toxic possession his parents had shown. He never mentioned Richard and Catherine or asked questions for them. He just enjoyed spending time with Emma and respected my boundaries. To watch them together made me cautiously grateful that Emma could be connected to David's family through someone healthy and polite. Mark looked so much like David that it hurt. But it was comforting to see family resemblance in someone who wasn't trying to hurt us. I worried he was a spy or trying to manipulate the situation, but he always sought permission before taking photos with Emma and sent them to me instead of publishing them where Richard and Catherine might see them. His commitment to his niece over his parents' delusions was amazing. Claire helped me grieve after losing David while fighting his parents. I stated that I couldn't mourn my spouse because I'd been in survival mode protecting our daughter from his family. The war had tied me up. Since things had calmed down, I was grieving in waves and angry at Richard and Catherine for corrupting my memories of David. I couldn't think about our wedding without remembering how his parents tried to control every detail and look at photos of David holding baby Emma without thinking about how his parents tried to take her from me. Claire helped me separate grieving David from digesting his parents' behavior by reminding me that David would have been shocked and protected Emma like I did. I witnessed their power and possession in their body language one afternoon while cleaning old photos of David growing up with his parents. Imagine him standing by me against them instead of being the reason they came after us helped. Catherine gripped David's shoulder tightly, fingers sinking in like she possessed him. Richard centered him in shots like a trophy they'd won, and David rarely looked happy or relaxed with them. Even as a child, his smile was unnatural. I believed David meant his parents were severe or conventional, but when they targeted Emma, I noticed the same possessive spirit. They attempted to own David his whole life, and after he died, they owned his daughter. After looking at those old photos, I realized I had saved Emma from repeating David's childhood, from being gripped and positioned and displayed as their property, instead of being loved as her own. On Thursday morning, the pediatrician's office received a report that Richard had requested Emma's medical records, claiming grandparent rights. She wanted me to know in case there was a pattern, so I thanked her and called Jackson immediately. He added this to the restraining order violation dossier we were compiling in case Richard and Catherine began acting out. Because they had no custody or guardianship rights, Jackson wrote to their lawyer that any additional attempts to acquire Emma's medical data would constitute harassment and restraining order violations. 4 months following the phony DNA test, Emma occasionally mentioned Grandma and Grandpa without distress. The pediatrician's office made comments to Emma's file and marked Richard and Catherine's names to report future contact attempts to me. She noted an older couple at the shop looked like grandparents, or remembered something they gave her before everything burst. But it was casual observation, not pain or longing. Alice took her on aunt and niece days at the zoo or children's museum and she became closer to her. My parents had also increased their involvement, driving in from 3 hours away every few weeks to spend weekends with us and take Emma to parks and libraries. Overall, the family structure around her was healthier and based on love rather than possession and conflict. Watching her thrive eased my guilt about the deception, but the moral weight of the lie still weighed on my conscience in quiet moments. The mail arrived on a Wednesday afternoon while Emma was at preschool. My hands shook as I opened the official envelope from a law firm 3 states away. The letterhead showed an address 900 miles away in a retirement community I'd never heard of. Richard and Catherine were moving. The brief, formal notice informed me of their restraining order address change. Mark called that night after Emma was asleep and sounded fatigued to tell me his parents had put their house on the market 4 weeks earlier without informing anybody and hired movers to relocate everything to this retirement home near the ocean. Catherine told their friends they couldn't live in David's hometown because it hurt too much to see places he used to go and know their granddaughter was missing just miles away. Richard told the neighbors they needed a fresh start somewhere, they wouldn't be reminded of their loss. They leased a 2-bedroom ocean view unit in a gated retirement community with security and activities for older residents. Mark had viewed Catherine's social media images before deleting them. She captioned a photo about new beginnings and healing from family betrayal. While legal barriers were high, location protected me. I said I was fine when Mark asked if I was okay 4 weeks after the moving notice. Jackson called to say he'd received a letter from Catherine's new lawyer. I drove to his office during lunch and sat across from his desk as he slid the envelope toward me. The letter was typed on expensive paper with their letterhead embossed on. Catherine demanded proof that Emma was their biological grandchild and that I had lied and maneuvered to keep their family apart. The lawyer's wording was polite, but her desperation was evident. Jackson observed my face while I read and responded strongly. Nothing to say. He said Catherine's offer was a ruse to get me to admit to lying. Meanwhile, DNA test findings stood. Jackson sealed his response in an envelope after I approved it. Catherine might not drop everything, and my confession would give them ammunition. Jackson's afternoon retort was harsh. The next Thursday, I sat in Claire's office explaining my recurring remorse. She listened while I discussed Catherine's letter, the move, and whether I should have done something else. Repeated custody ambushes 3 weeks after David's funeral and fake CPS reports to create a case against me. Claire leaned closer and inquired what Richard and Catherine offered me. A private eye and 4 lawyers. My life is manipulated from Emma's preschool to our pediatrician to our neighbors. Pre-court princess chamber decor. I was threatened to never see Emma again if I fought. Claire inquired about ethics. She stated I'd put Emma's safety before my morality, as a mother should in a tough situation. I could expose my daughter to individuals who saw her as property and me as an incubator, or I could deceive predators who'd shown they'd destroy me to achieve what they wanted. Richard and Catherine broke all the rules, forcing me to lose my child if I behaved ethically. I cried for 4 minutes in her office while she sat silently. She said remorse was normal, but I had to distinguish deception from survival. I used the only weapon to save Emma from a hazardous circumstance. That made me a mother who refused to be destroyed by grief owners. Not a horrible person. The night Emma fell asleep, I took out a blank journal I'd bought weeks previously but couldn't read. A pen in hand, I stared at the empty first page at the kitchen table for a long time before writing. I covered David's death, funeral, and Richard and Catherine's Emma fixation. Emma may read this journal about the custody paperwork, bogus CPS reports, systematic harassment, fake DNA test plan, execution, and aftermath when she was old enough. I included my deception-related worries and guilt. When she asked the hard questions about why her father's parents weren't in her life at 16, 20, or 30, I wanted her to know the truth, including my failures, lies, manipulation, and relationship destruction. The first night I wrote for 3 hours, filling pages with things I didn't want to forget. My journal would ensure she knew the truth even if something happened before I could tell her. Emma was adding chocolate chips into the batter Saturday morning and didn't see when I entered the hallway to answer the call. Mark's voice strained as he told me his parents still believed I fabricated the DNA test. Their new retirement home neighbors learned their son's widow lied about test results to keep their grandchild. Emma was their biological grandchild being held prisoner by a vengeful lady, they stated with images. They found fresh audiences for their illusion in their new neighborhood, where no one knew the past. People in their previous town nodded politely and changed the subject when Catherine mentioned conspiracy, fraud, and stolen grandkids. Catherine immediately joined the retirement community's social committee and has been presenting Emma's photos at coffee hours and book groups to raise awareness of the family tragedy. Mark learned this from a family acquaintance with a local cousin. Mark seemed fatigued when he claimed he'd tried to talk to them but they wouldn't hear anything contradicting their story. They had a comprehensive story about being victims of my harshness instead than legitimate child thieves. It was time to return Emma to the cemetery after 6 months. At a flower shop she chose a little yellow rose bouquet. The cemetery was quiet on Wednesday afternoon, with few visitors among the headstones. We strolled to David's grave with Emma's hand after I parked. Emma gently placed the roses at the base of his gray granite gravestone, which said, "Beloved husband and father." We talked about David while she picked petals off one of the roses and arranged them in patterns. Emma played with the flower petals while I told her about Daddy's hilarious voices when he read her bedtime stories, how he danced with her in the kitchen while I cooked supper, and how he shed happy tears when she was born. Her question about Daddy knowing Grandma and Grandpa were furious at us tightened my throat, but I kept my voice calm. I told her Daddy wanted everyone to be kind and loving even in sad times. She returned to petal arranging, happy. We lasted 30 minutes before the breeze made Emma cold. I looked at the headstone one more time and silently told David I'd protected our daughter well. I woke up one morning to find I'd slept through the night without panicking. This was the first time I saw it after weeks of gradual change. I was awakened numerous times a night for months after the custody battle, worried Emma was in danger. I obsessively checked her room and imagined the worst. The day had left me fatigued and jumpy from stress chemicals, but something had changed. My body was relearning safety. Claire smiled when I informed her in our next session. After years of survival mode, my nervous system needed time to acclimate to safety. Restraining order, distance, and no new dangers were calming my hypervigilance. She warned that I'd always be more attentive to Emma's threats than parents who hadn't fought off a custody attempt, but the panic was lessening enough I could function again without despair. After the session, I felt lighter than in months. Jackson called to update me on the empty restraining order violation file since the flower incident. Catherine and Richard hadn't threatened me or appeared. Jackson said their out-of-state migration and legal impediments are working. They've either accepted Emma's inaccessibility, or are waiting and planning something we can't see. He cautioned caution, but the situation was better than in months. To assure continuing protection, Jackson advised initiating renewal processes 7 months before the restraining order expired. After restraining orders expired, he'd seen grandparents harass again. Emma asked more David questions at bedtime. She asked about his favorite color, games, and drawing skills. I thanked him and put a 1.5-year phone calendar reminder. I answered each question with simple, happy memories of fun. She deserved to know her father as a loving father, not via his parents' dysfunction. I promised her David would build sophisticated block towers with her and collapse them. David's childhood stories showed his benevolence and humor, such saving a bird with a broken wing and keeping it in a shoebox until it healed. Mark started helping on visits. Emma quietly stated that her dad liked blue, or fixed things while playing. These anecdotes also shaped her view of her father. On Wednesday night, Claire's widowed parents support group met at the community hall and 8 scared, exhausted adults sat in a circle of folding chairs. I met the facilitator, who told me about a guy with 3 children under 10 whose wife died of cancer. While coaching their son's soccer game, another woman's husband had a heart attack. Many had in-law issues, but none had custody disputes. Their late husband's mother called regularly to criticize her parenting and demand more time with the grandchildren. Even though their stories were varied, hearing them normalized my experience. They knew bereavement and family conflict were lonely. Multiple people exchanged phone numbers after 3 hours of discussing coping tactics, legal protections, and therapeutic services. Knowing others had survived similar terrible situations gave me strength to drive home feeling less alone than in months. Alice arrived with coffee and empty boxes Saturday morning and neatly piled David's button-downs, jeans, work shirts and tattered college hoodie. I watched from the doorway. He put his favorite flannel concert t-shirt from our first date, and hoodie from the morning he died in a smaller box for Emma. Some I kept, but most went into donation boxes. Among his documents, photos, and souvenirs on his desk, we uncovered a stack of letters David wrote to Emma before she was born, sealed envelopes with her name in his untidy handwriting. I opened one and read his wishes for her future, pledges to be a wonderful dad, and enthusiasm about meeting her. The movie ticket stub, Emma's rock that David saved on his desk, and my horrible birthday card with terrible drawings were in 4 memory boxes with photos, notes and tiny items that captured David's personality. I cried quickly, but they felt clean compared to my months of panicked survival. The bedroom felt lighter and more like a breathing place when the charity boxes went to the garage. My preschool director spotted me on Wednesday during pickup. After asking if I had a few minutes to chat about Emma, my stomach fell with apprehension, but her smile was welcoming and she took me to her office with Emma's artwork on the walls. She said kids exchanged anecdotes about their parents and siblings during family talk time. Emma mentioned her dad from home images and my stories virtually every session. She informed the class he liked blue, built towers well, and made hilarious faces that made her laugh. Emma's thorough and exact descriptions showed she was connecting with David's memory, the director stated. Emma drew a picture of our family with David holding hands and smiling. According to the teacher, though she lost her father young, she seemed emotionally well and well-adjusted. She simply stated that he was her father and that she loved him. I drew David's crayon sketch after seeing Emma's family portrait from the director. As he appeared, he was tall with dark hair and a wide smile. I thanked the director and drove home pleased Emma was grieving properly. Richard and Catherine arrived at the Arizona retirement community 900 miles away on Wednesday. Certified mail delivered the letter with a community-named return label. My chest relaxed as I held the mail in my driveway. Mark called that night to confirm they'd moved in and told the community their son's widow wouldn't allow them visit their grandchild. Mark stated his parents had made them the victims and me the villain, but the distance made them someone else's issue. It went over well with neighbors, who expressed sympathy and fury. After David's death, I woke up functional again 6 months later. Surviving and living in ways that were unthinkable in those first horrible weeks. I could handle projects and meetings without losing focus. Emma was thriving at preschool, making friends and learning daily. Our routines included breakfast, sleep and weekend errands. My grief still weighed on me every morning when I woke up alone, but it wasn't debilitating. I could miss David while getting Emma ready for school, cooking dinner, and paying payments. The fear of losing her to Richard and Catherine had subsided. I monitored security cameras and kept my phone close. I checked parking lots for their automobile and avoided their hangouts. Claire asked me how I would approach the DNA test with Emma when she was older and understood. As justified protection or manipulative deception. Nobody told me. Claire explained the situation without giving easy answers. I believed she'd realize Richard and Catherine compelled me to lie to protect her, but I worried she'd see it as proof I lied about her father. I promised Claire to be honest with Emma when she could understand. I'd tell her what happened and why I chose, and I'd accept her opinion. Claire only allowed me honesty and accountability, leaving Emma to digest the rest. Mark took Nicole, his fiancée, a third-grade teacher from 2 towns, to meet Emma on Saturday afternoon. Nicole brought a toy elephant and a feeling book for kids. Emma presented Nicole with the toy kitchen and asked restaurant play. Nicole was friendly and natural with her, asking questions and playing along. Instead of mentioning David or trying to be a mother, she treated Emma like a youngster she liked. Mark was relieved to watch them play after worrying about this introduction. Nicole informed me she understood Richard and Catherine while Emma colored. She backed Mark's desire to distance himself from his parents and be close to his niece. She knew Emma needed solid family relationships because she lost her father young. Watching them go, Mark's hand on Nicole's back, and them wave to Emma was like seeing David's family grow strong and healthy. In downtown Jackson's office with too much marble and terrible chairs, I sat across from him as he spread files across his desk to revise my will and custody arrangements to prevent Richard and Catherine from accessing Emma after I died. Jackson mentioned the DNA test without admitting deceit. The phrasing carefully noted that Richard and Catherine had decided to abandon custody claims based on test results, which was legally enforceable. Alice was primary guardian. He further stated that their documented harassment and fake CPS reports would determine custody, even if the DNA test was challenged. Jackson led me through the difficult paperwork, granting Alice immediate legal custody and complete authority to maintain the restraining order and restrict communication. Richard and Catherine were barred from guardianship. Jackson filed copies with the court after I signed everything. Leaving his office gave me the same relief as the restraining order. Legal protection. I replayed the bogus DNA test in bed, witnessing Richard's purple face and Catherine's horror when Fletcher gave the false results. David's look in our wedding photos made me question if he'd mind me lying about his daughter's paternity to protect her from his parents. I remembered Richard calling me an incubator, Catherine's systematic false CPS reports to make me look unfit, their complete disregard for Emma's bond with me or her emotional well-being, and how they'd shown up with lawyers 3 weeks after David died before I'd even started to process his death when I couldn't breathe. I had to make the same option every time, because my only weapon was lying. Although the guilt was heavy, I knew Emma was secure and thriving because I did whatever it took. Emma and I created new Christmas traditions without Richard and Catherine's destructive influence. We hung photo ornaments on the tree so she could see David's smile. I showed her superhero movies he loved and told her Dad would quote every phrase. I told her he sang made-up songs while doing dishes and danced despite being lousy to make her laugh. She was connecting with her father through memories and affection, not Richard and Catherine's ownership. Wednesday morning I saw Mrs. Anderson at the grocery store. Richard and Catherine tried to turn her against me during the custody battle. After seeing me, she halted her cart and I braced for conflict. Instead she apologized and said she regretted believing Richard and Catherine's assertions that I was unstable and neglected Emma. She discovered their neighborhood manipulation campaign after they left. Other neighbors had discussed and discovered. Anderson inquired how Emma was doing. I said she was okay. We briefly discussed neighborhood issues before parting ways. Something changed as I drove home. Richard and Catherine's community healed. Our isolation and siege were lifted. Mark arrived on Wednesday afternoon while Emma was at preschool and we had coffee at my kitchen table. He said his parents called him every few days to ask about Emma and her life. Mark said Emma was just healthy and joyful. He told Richard and Catherine that his relationship with me and Emma was independent from their mess and that he wouldn't spy or communicate. He added they still claimed the DNA test was phony and I deceived everyone, but their tale varied per person. I was astonished by his commitment to his niece despite his parents' twisted ownership claims. I altered samples, Fletcher was involved, or it was elaborate payback for a slight. Mark found it stressful watching them destroy themselves over lies they'd convinced themselves were truth. 8 months after the phony DNA test, I could look at our wedding photos without crying. He cried as I praised him for being Emma's only decent connection to David's family, stating she deserved to know her father's memory without his parents' poison. David and I laughed throughout our first dance, cut the cake with frosting on our noses, and kissed under the sunset with his hand on my face. Emma crept up alongside me and pointed at a photo of David lifting me. I could see our love and family without Richard and Catherine's nastiness. I hugged her tightly and whispered, Yes, we were very happy and Daddy loved us both so much. She nodded and returned to her blocks, content with this simple family truth. 3 years remained on the restraining order. Jackson had described the process and told me that renewal would be straightforward given Richard and Catherine's documented behavior, so I started renewing. Their silence and isolation may indicate that they've given up or are planning something fresh. My fireproof safe had restraining order documents, bogus DNA test results, every fraudulent CPS report, and custody hearing transcripts. I couldn't risk Emma's safety assuming their motives. Richard calling me an incubator and Catherine's relentless campaign to depict me as an unfit mother made me question whether I was delusional. Paranoia and security are better than trust and vulnerability. Claire gently mentioned that isolation wasn't healing in one session. I needed to move on after betraying David. I loved my husband and worried that dating would mean forgetting or betraying him. Claire said me living fully was the best way to honor David and teach Emma resilience. My first dates were awkward and uncomfortable. Coffee dates with nice dating app men that didn't click. Some guys were scared by my disclosure that I was a widowed single mother with a difficult in-law history. I understood their inability to handle a 5-year-old and legal issues, but each failed date hurt. I tried, put myself out there, and proved life was more than survival. Emma invited Uncle Mark to her 5th birthday party one morning, and I agreed immediately. She planned the unicorn cake, purple balloons, and preschool classmates' visit for weeks. Respect and reasonable boundaries earned Mark my trust. I cried when Mark gave Emma an art set she desired and a framed photo of David holding Emma. Several parents praised him for playing with the kids and helping with activities. Unlike the first year after David's death, the party was fun and normal. Watching Emma blow out her candles alongside loved ones made me feel like we'd constructed something stable and decent from the devastation. 3 weeks after Emma's party, the intermediary called me to tell Catherine had asked for one Emma photo. Catherine was heartbroken and seeking her granddaughter. The intermediary stated Catherine cried and acted like a sad woman rather than the custody manipulator. She preferred one current photo to meeting Emma and talking to me. Thanking the intermediary for the message, I requested time to consider it. I hadn't planned to answer to Catherine since any contact would open a door I'd worked to seal. The request made me consider kindness versus safety. Was Catherine actually suffering or was this manipulation? The trauma she caused, did her pain matter? Could one photo hurt? At my next therapy session with Claire, she helped me process the photo request by reviewing Richard and Catherine's first response to David's death and how they treated Emma like property rather than a kid. Instead of affection, they supported their bereaved daughter-in-law with attorneys, fake reports, and manipulation. Claire argued their need didn't erase their tragedy or prove they'd change their image of Emma as theirs. One snapshot may appear innocent, but it would show them I was eager to participate, my boundaries were malleable, and perseverance might wear me down. Catherine had insulted me in front of her family, Richard had threatened to take my kid away, and they'd tried to tarnish my community character. Claire suggested the kindest thing I could do for everyone was keep Emma safe and me sane with rules. I felt bad for Catherine's pain, but I must protect her from danger. I started arranging Emma's fall kindergarten transfer 9 months after the custody fight. I submitted comprehensive documentation of Richard's Catherine restraining order at enrolling. The school secretary added their names and images to the banned individuals list, labeled Emma's file with security alerts, and ensured they were forbidden from Emma's contact and information. The principal said they took these occurrences seriously and had protocols. Emma could only be picked up by myself or other adults, and anyone stealing her information would be reported to police. Security became part of our routine rather than a crisis response. After surviving, I completed Alice and Mark's emergency contact paperwork, updated medical information, signed field trip permission papers, and other parent activities that felt amazing. James and I sat next to each other during a tedious conference talk and joked. James took my number after months of survival mode, and we texted, had coffee, and went on dates. He was understanding of my challenging circumstances and interested in getting to know me and Emma. He respected my modest pace because I wasn't ready to rush. After months of survival, his presence seemed possible. He addressed insightful questions about David and never challenged my history or competed with my husband's memories. When I vaguely described the in-law issue, he listened without judgment and didn't press for more. He made me laugh, sent nice good morning texts, and appeared content to let our relationship grow at my pace. Mark called one night, excited and worried, asking if we might meet for coffee the day following the DNA test bombshell. I learned he was engaged to his fiancée at the coffee shop where we first talked after the blast. So I congratulated him because I met her at Emma's party and she was. Mark then requested Emma to be their flower girl, which would be out of state for Richard and Catherine. I declined, but Mark soon emphasized that his parents would not be attending and that he had elaborate security measures. They were prohibited from the venue due to security guards and staff images of Richard and Catherine. His wife realized that Emma's safety came before family conflict and supported this decision. Mark said he'd gained trust via respect and appropriate boundaries and hoped Emma could be part of his special day. After 10 months following the phony DNA test, I felt honest in the mirror. I agreed to security and emergency measures, and Mark wrote everything down. He cried as he thanked me, stating having his niece celebrate with him meant everything. Richard and Catherine coerced my hand by treating my sadness like weakness, and my daughter like property they might claim through papers and deceit. I protected her the only way they left, and seeing her grow made the moral weight bearable, even if it never went away. I still woke up thinking about what I did, but then I saw Emma sleeping blissfully in her room and remembered why I crossed that line. She was mine to defend, and I'd do it again. Her backpack bounced when Emma started kindergarten in late September. When her teacher called me 4 weeks into the school year to schedule a conference, I worried something was wrong, but she grinned and said Emma was doing great. Emma made friends easily, participated in class debates, and read above grade level, according to her teacher. She occasionally mentioned her father in sharing time, saying he died in a vehicle accident, but she still loved him. Emma's processing of David's death was healthy and age-appropriate, said the teacher. Her non-traumatization and lack of behavioral issues lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months. I worried the custody battle and losing David would destroy her foundation, but she looked great. Emma knew James was my friend, but this was their first meeting. Emma helped me set the table with triangle-shaped paper napkins after I made spaghetti. Emma graciously took James' flowers and coloring book. James helped her blend crayon colors, and they sang crazy songs about their animals as I did dishes. He never impersonated her father or David. He treated her like a valuable person with true compassion and respect. Jackson called me on a Wednesday morning 11 months after the custody struggle in response to Richard's formal letter through a new lawyer requesting mediation to repair the family split. I felt better seeing them chuckle at a purple elephant drawing. Jackson read the letter over the phone, and I could hear his disbelief. He suspected deception to get Emma or me to admit something about the DNA test. They may hope I collapse at mediation and admit the test was false. Or they may be recording a reconciliation attempt to file for grandparent visitation later. Jackson urged me to decline legally without physical contact, which I did immediately. I only spoke to Richard and Catherine through the restraining order. Richard's lawyer wrote me an angry letter 3 days later, calling me nasty and accusing me of parental alienation. Jackson saved it in case we needed harassing proof. Mark married on a Saturday in October at a winery 3 hours away. Emma looked somber as she carried a basket of rose petals down the aisle in a white dress with pink flowers. Like a pro, she dropped petals every few steps as a flower girl. Mark promised Richard and Catherine an invitation, but venue security officers had images of them and asked them to notify police if they showed up. Nicole, Mark's bride, crouched down to Emma, admired her attire, and asked if she was excited to be flower girl when we arrived for photos before the ceremony. Nicole met me twice before the wedding and knew Richard and Catherine. It was apparent she welcomed Emma and supported Mark's decision to exclude his parents. Emma danced at the reception, ate too much cake, and fell asleep driving home. Just over a year after David's death, Emma and I visited his grave on a November Sunday afternoon. Emma delicately placed the flowers on his headstone while I stood behind her with my hand on her shoulder and told Daddy about kindergarten, her teacher, and Olivia, her new friend. She recounted Uncle Mark's wedding and her flower petal throw. She then recounted her new friend James, who taught her to draw elephants and read books with hilarious voices. When his parents tried to take Emma, I knelt next to her and told David I did my best to save her. Despite my unclean and complicated decisions, I believed he understood. James brought me to a quiet restaurant for dinner the week before Thanksgiving while Alice watched Emma. We evolved gently and cautiously over 7 months of dating. He clasped my hand across the table and confessed his love for Emma and me. He wanted to heal instead than replace, develop something fresh, and honor David and me without rushing. Emma called him James, not Daddy, and everyone understood. James always arrived and was nice and kind. When I told him I liked him but needed to take things slow, he grinned and said he'd wait. After supper, we drove to my house to find Emma sleeping on Alice's lap watching a movie. Emma was doing well in kindergarten with friends, confidence, and good methods to communicate about her dad. Alice, Mark, and James were our lovely family. The weeks after David died were sad, but I was happy in ways I never thought possible. My phony DNA test was morally confusing and unethical, yet it protected me. We were protected from Richard and Catherine, who lived 900 miles away with fantasies they'd never abandon. Emma climbed into my bed and told me about her dreams some mornings, while I made pancakes and she colored at the kitchen table. Healing and establishing a future that respected David without his parents' dysfunction were our goals. The death of David restored normal life in ways I thought were lost forever. There was still grief, but it wasn't overwhelming. Coexisting happiness and loss seemed like a win. My mom said, "It's for emergencies." Then took my spare key without asking. I changed the locks. But what happened next was even worse. At the age of 28, I became aware that my own family was treating my apartment like a hotel lobby without a front desk. My name is Sophie Bennett. Only the person who lives there on a daily basis would notice the small inaccuracies at the beginning. Suddenly, a pair of sneakers that I usually kicked off by the door were neatly positioned against the wall. There was a rinsed mug on the counter that I had left in the sink. The hallway smelled faintly of fabric softener that I had not used. There was nothing lacking. There was nothing damaged. However, the air felt touched and used. I told myself I was being paranoid at first. I worked long shifts close to Miami's resorts, came home tired, and occasionally forgot where I left things. Then I opened my refrigerator, though. There was a glass container of casserole that I hadn't cooked on the middle shelf. Beside a pile of well-packaged leftovers that I most certainly hadn't purchased, there was a sticky note with someone else's handwriting on top, referring to me by a nickname I hadn't used since high school. My stomach dropped at that very moment. No one had simply dropped by. They had settled in. In case of an emergency, my parents had an extra key. My sister was fully aware of its storage location. That combination had somehow made my place into a revolving door that I had never consented to. When someone had entered the one area I could now afford to call my own, I was the last to know. Tell me what time it is for you right now and where you are watching from before I tell you what he said and what transpired after I left. I'm interested to see how much of this story spreads. My mind finally registered what I had just entered later that night. The air in my Miami kitchen felt strange, as though someone else's day had collided with mine and lingered. Nothing felt untouched, but nothing appeared to be broken. Even more intense than the heat outside was the feeling that someone else was passing through my personal space. When I first signed the lease, my mother, Rachel Turner, had been the one to insist on having a spare key. Knowing that I wasn't entirely alone, she referred to it as a safety net and a means of sleeping at night. I agreed without thinking at the time because I was so happy to be able to afford a small place close to the resorts. It had seemed easier to say yes to that key than no. It was like passing over a fragment of the front door now. Emily Turner, my younger sister, had always felt at ease in situations where boundaries were meant to be strict. When she was younger, she disregarded boundaries as suggestions, and sneaked into rooms that she had been told to leave alone. My skin pricked at the thought of her knowing there was a simple way to get into my apartment. There was a difference between having her routine seep into the one area of my life that finally felt like mine and sharing a bathroom in the hallway as teenagers. I read the note again after picking it up off the food. The handwriting appeared cozy and well-known. When I was 12, she used the same loops and hearts on my lunchbox notes. Nowhere was there any doubt. No cue to inquire if this was acceptable. It read more like a summary of what she had already decided to do than a request. The natural next step seemed to be to give her a call. However, my chest tightened just by tapping her name on my screen. Her voice was bright and efficient, the tone she used when she thought she was being the ideal mother. I informed her that when I had returned home, there were obvious indications that someone had been inside during my workday. She sounded proud of herself for helping and confirmed it right away. She saw dropping off food as an act of pure kindness. She mentioned that she had been reflecting on how hard I worked close to the attractions, and how frequently I made jokes about how I only ate cereal and takeout. She believed that there was a spare key to solve those issues. She was unable to notice the subtle transgression in the dishes and minor adjustments. All she could see was her own intention and the narrative she had in her mind about caring for me. I attempted to clarify that it was unacceptable for her to enter my home unexpectedly, regardless of her intentions. I claimed that it gave me the impression that my apartment was rented rather than owned. I nearly heard her shrug from the other end of the line. She said I was exaggerating, that family shouldn't require an invitation, and that my concern for my privacy sounded like something I had read about online. My pulse was still racing by the end of the call, but I couldn't help but wonder if I had overreacted. After a long shift, the food saved me from having to order another greasy meal. Compared to when I left, the kitchen appeared cleaner. For a few days, I allowed those facts to try to soften the edges of what had happened. I ate the leftovers, stacked the containers, and convinced myself that the discomfort in my chest was just a result of getting used to living alone. I couldn't lie to myself the second time it happened. The sound of traffic from the neighboring attractions drifted up to my window on this Saturday morning, late enough that sunlight had already warmed the balcony. I got out of bed and decided to take a slow shower and have coffee before going to work. The hair on my arms stood up as soon as I entered the restroom. I had never purchased the bottle that was sitting on the shelf in my shower. The label was oriented forward as if it belonged there. I had only seen this salon brand in other people's bathrooms, and it smelled sharp and pricey. I could tell who owned it, just by looking at the color and shape. Emily was always interested in little indulgences, high-end hair products, well-coordinated ensembles, and the perfect gloss. She threw her belongings on the communal counter and called it getting ready, which caused us to fight as children. Everything became clear when I saw the same energy in my apartment with just one bathroom. Not only had someone returned to my house, but they had also taken a shower, unpacked their toiletries, and departed silently. I looked at the rack of towels. One of my fresh towels was still damp at the bottom edge and hung slightly crooked. I didn't remember where the bath mat was sitting. Someone had pushed my toothbrush aside. The same realization gained weight with each minor alteration. My mother wasn't the only one who stopped by to offer assistance. Without even thinking to ask me first, my sister had made my house into a handy crash pad. This time, the rage that surfaced felt different. It was less confused, heavier, and less amenable to being denigrated. One could almost classify the first incident as a misunderstanding. This one revealed a trend. There was no safety net in the spare key. They thought they could enter through this door whenever it was convenient for them. No one moved for a moment. Mom's face hardened after that. Her mouth tightened in a manner I was all too familiar with, and her brows fell. She threw the word out like a shield and said, "Why? It's for emergencies." She discussed everything that could happen to a young woman living alone close to the tourist area, including storms, late nights, and car problems. Each instance was presented as an additional justification for her access. That's no excuse for me to lose control of my front door. I explained to her that an emergency was not an empty refrigerator or a dirty sink, but rather something uncommon and urgent. I said that knowing that people had come and gone without telling me made me feel unsafe. She didn't give me a worried look. It was indignation wrapped around hurt, the same expression that had put an end to arguments when I was a teenager. At last, Emily set her phone aside. Leaning back in her chair, she examined me as if I were exaggerating a small annoyance. "We're only trying to help you," she stated. "You work all the time. Mom just wants to make sure you eat and don't burn out." Helpful people didn't need permission, in her opinion. Gratitude was meant to come naturally. I noticed that my mother and sister were in perfect alignment as I glanced between them. They believed they had the right to enter my apartment, which was an addition to this house. John Turner, my dad, entered the house from the garage and used an old towel to wipe his hands. He felt the tension as he looked around. Dad had always been able to persuade Emily to make concessions or talk Mom down. There was a part of me that wished he would say aloud that moving out meant having a door that only answered to me. Rather, he listened as Mom said, "I wanted to take their key away." She presented it as me abandoning my family while omitting the details that made everything feel intrusive. The room fell silent once more when she was done. I reiterated my need for the key. My place was not a shared resource, and my inability to rest in peace knowing that anyone else could open my door at any time. He let out the weary, disillusioned sigh that used to come before lectures on accountability. "We're not giving it back," he declared. No rage, no yelling, only closure. There was nothing left to bargain over if even he believed that my need for privacy was unreasonable. When they looked at their daughters, they did not see adults. They perceived themselves as extensions. The remainder of the visit was hazy. Mom went through phases of tears and scathing remarks. Emily shook her head as if I were crazy and returned to her phone. Dad poured coffee and arranged snacks as if this were any other afternoon, moving around the kitchen as if the choice had been made and the issue resolved. I was able to stay long enough to know that nothing I said would make them reconsider. I had to squint on the way back because the late afternoon sun was hitting the windshield so hard, but my focus felt better than it had in weeks. They refused to relinquish control. I would have to accept it if I wanted to feel secure in my own house. I sat at my little table that evening with a notepad and my laptop, looking for weekend locksmiths. After writing down names and numbers, I circled one that seemed trustworthy. A tiny knot of resolve formed in my chest as I read reviews and pictured a stranger replacing the metal that had so easily allowed my family to enter. My family's perception of me would not change if the lock was changed, but at least one door that they thought still belonged to them would be closed. I made a locksmith appointment by the following afternoon. He went straight to the deadbolt after checking my ID in the hallway and setting out a small roll of tools. It sounded louder than it should have in a studio apartment. The clicks against the metal. He gave me 3 new keys after he was done. Although they appeared normal, there was a noticeable difference. My family thought they owned the door with the old lock. This one only responded to me. It should have been common practice to change a lock. I felt as though I was drawing a line that my parents would not see. I wanted to come home after late shifts near the Miami attractions, and know that if anything in my apartment had moved, it was because I had moved it, not because someone else had decided my space was theirs to manage. I rode the elevator down to the leasing office after he left. When I walked in, the assistant property manager looked up from his computer. James Porter was written on his badge. I informed him that I needed my file updated and that I had paid to have my lock replaced. I tried to keep the story as clean as possible. I was living by myself. I wanted no one to enter my unit unless I specifically asked them to. So I had changed the hardware. I found it more difficult to maintain a steady voice the more I spoke. I mentioned that someone had already entered without my knowledge. After listening, James tapped a number of screens. He clarified that staff were not allowed to unlock an apartment simply because a family member asked, and that the complex kept a master key for emergencies like fires or flooding, not for convenience. He stopped typing when I asked what would happen if someone said I was ill or unavailable. Technically, we still say no, he stated. It felt more solid to hear someone who hardly knew me say, people can make anything sound urgent. If you like, I can put a note on your account so there's no question. No access for anyone but you. Yes, I told him. For the next week, my days finally looked like the one I had envisioned when I signed the lease. He added a short line, then swiveled the monitor slightly so I could see my name next to the words authorized resident only. I used the new key to open my door after going to work and returning past the same billboards and gift shops. Without my hand on it, nothing moved inside. My sister and mother's messages continued to buzz on my phone, but I didn't respond to them all. It was easy to think the worst was behind us because of the silence. Perhaps my mother was persuaded that there were boundaries she could not cross after learning that the lock had been changed and that the office had a note on file. I knew better than to put all my faith in that. But I let myself breathe out for a few days. Then the illusion broke on a Tuesday night following a double shift. Using the new key, I opened my door and stepped out into cool air. The mail was still piled where I left it, the blinds were partially closed, and the lights were off. Then, beneath the hum of the air conditioner, a subtle floral aroma wafted in. Something I didn't own from a candle. The garbage can had been emptied and repackaged in the kitchen. On the rack, the pan I had left soaking that morning was dry. There was a stack of takeout containers from a restaurant just outside my parents' neighborhood on the counter next to my own grocery bag. Both the frame and the bolt were undamaged. Although my bedroom door was still open, and the bed was made more securely than I ever bothered to do before work, the key still turned smoothly. There was a sweater in the closet that I recalled dropping over a chair. My mail was divided into 2 neat stacks. A handwritten note rested in the center of the coffee table, like a display. The rounded letters were instantly recognizable. There was no pretense of hesitation this time. She wrote that she had discussed the situation with the front desk, that they were understanding of a mother's worry, and that she had arranged for access in case she needed to check on me. The sentence remained motionless on the page. Someone had heard her side of the story and decided to unlock my door anyhow. Somewhere downstairs in the same office where I had watched James type, authorized resident only next to my name. Not only that, but my family had also gone too far. They had managed to sway the structure to support their claim to the building. I became aware that I was no longer squabbling over a spare key as I stood in the center of that meticulously cleaned room. I was resisting the idea that my comfort could be exchanged as long as the person claiming to be doing it did so out of love. I headed straight to the leasing office the following morning. As soon as I entered, James looked up. He stood up at whatever he saw on my face. I placed the note on his desk from my kitchen table. Like evidence that the line we had added to my file meant less than either of us had assumed, the paper lay between us. After flagging my account, he read it and asked who had allowed my mother to enter the building. I informed him that she had resolved the issue with the front desk, according to the note. James looked over the visitor sign-in sheet and the key usage log. He discovered an entry from a weekday afternoon that lacked identification and had my last name misspelled. A desk employee had determined that a concerned parent was more entitled to access than the renter. He expressed regret in a manner that neither of my parents had. After promising to write up and retrain the employee who had unlocked my door, he added another note to my account in capital letters that left no room for interpretation. To see exactly what the system said about my unit, he offered to email me a copy of the updated notation. As I made my way back upstairs, I became aware of a significant change. At last, the building was on my side. Not my family. It was easier to sleep for a few days, knowing that at least one barrier would hold. I had never bothered to lock the chain inside the door before, but I started doing it now. I stopped when I heard footsteps in the hallway and waited for them to stop. After working a shorter shift than usual one late afternoon, I parked in my work clothes and made my way to my building. Two familiar silhouettes stood near the gate, sufficiently distant from the keypad to appear unconcerned. In the shadows, my mother and sister waited for an opportunity to move, their eyes darting toward the doorway whenever someone came. I watched from behind a parked car. An elderly couple entered the code while pushing a stroller to the gate. Mom moved forward, grabbed the door, and held it open with a rehearsed thank you as soon as the lock buzzed. Without coming into contact with the metal, Emily slipped in behind her. They hadn't used a key. There was no cleverness in sliding through a secured entrance. It was unyielding. A stranger let them into my building after they had driven across town and stood in the heat. If my family was prepared to wait outside until they could ride in on someone else's access, locked hardware and capital letters in the computer system would mean nothing. I used my own key after waiting for the gate to close once more. I stopped on the second-floor landing. I heard voices coming through my door. Cabinet doors swung open and shut. Slow passes of footfalls swept the floor. They were in the living room when I entered. In addition to folding a blanket I kept draped over the back of the couch, my mother had moved the throw pillows around. Emily appeared to be unpacking for an overnight stay as her tote bag, half full of clothes and makeup, sat open on the armchair. When they saw me, neither of them appeared surprised. Mom asked if I was exhausted from work after remarking on how exhausted I appeared. Emily asked where she could leave a pair of heels that weren't mine so they wouldn't be in the way. I reiterated to them that they could not come and go in this manner. I claimed to have spoken with the office, changed the locks, and made it apparent that I was the only person permitted in the apartment. Mom dismissed that, explaining that the gate had been open and that she was cleaning up for me. Emily said that my place made sense and that she needed a place closer to the area of town where she enjoyed going out at night. They portrayed me as obstinate and unappreciative. In mine, they were positioned in the center of my house, arguing that their convenience outweighed my boundaries. I knew I was arguing with people who had no desire to change, even as I reiterated how unacceptable this was. The silence did not feel serene after they were gone. It was brittle. As I went from room to room, I took note of everything they had moved, including the couch they were sitting on, the door they had entered, and the hallway where they had slipped past other residents who believed they belonged there. I finally came to the conclusion I had been avoiding for months by the time the sun set behind the buildings. Conversations, office notes, and new locks would never be sufficient. My family would always find a way to go over the line and call it love as long as they knew where I lived. The address itself was the only thing I could alter that they couldn't alter. After a week, remaining where I was began to feel more like a dare than a sign of strength. During my breaks, I browsed through apartment listings, glancing over pictures and searching for addresses on the outskirts of town, controlled entrances, and interior hallways. I desired a location that my family would not unintentionally pass. On the outskirts of Miami, one listing caught our attention. The description was important, but the images were simple. The lobby was locked for residents to enter. The office did not provide codes as a courtesy, and guests had to buzz in from upstairs. It sounded more like a structure that thought doors should remain closed than a resort. The leasing agent discussed parking and appliances during a morning tour. I inquired about their response to those who came in demanding to see how someone was doing. She responded that staff could not unlock anything or release information unless a name was on the lease. More comforting than anything else she showed me was that policy. Before I could convince myself to stay, I signed the lease and completed the application that day. I wouldn't be out of reach if I moved across town, but my family wouldn't know where to look. I told Na and Dana. Neither my parents nor my sister had ever met them. They didn't try to justify it when I told them what had been going on in my current location. They asked useful questions. When was the van needed? How much could we transport? Which time of day would be the most peaceful? We rented a moving van and selected a weekday morning. I put the move-out date on a calendar in a drawer and submitted my notice online to my current complex. Before I left, I packed a few boxes every night and slid them into my bedroom closet so there wouldn't be anything obvious to see if someone decided to stop by. Before the sun cleared the roofs on the day of the move, the air outside was heavy. The van was backed up to the stairwell by Dana. No. I carried heavier loads while you took lighter ones. Months of tension are released with each trip down the stairs. I kept looking in the direction of the parking lot, half expecting to see my mother's car, but the spaces continued to be occupied by cars belonging to strangers. As we were moving the final boxes, James happened to cross our path once. He inquired as to whether I was moving to a different unit. I thanked him for listening to my worries when I asked him to lock down my file and informed him that I was moving to a new complex. I asked one last question before he left. I wanted my family to know that I no longer reside there if they happened to stop by after I left. He assured me that nothing on file would be available for staff to share with anyone who wasn't a resident after I turned in my keys. I interpreted it as a boundary that was incorporated into the system rather than just my voice. My apartment was deserted by noon. Pale rectangles where frames had hung were visible on the walls. They cleaned the counters. I went through each room again to make sure I hadn't left anything that someone might use as an excuse to call. I turned in my keys and signed the move-out paperwork at the office. Even if they had my last name, I reiterated my request that no forwarding information be provided to anyone who inquired. The unit was marked as vacant by the clerk, who nodded. Although the new location was smaller, the sound of the lobby door clicking shut behind me on my first visit felt substantial. I noticed my own footsteps as I carried a box into the empty living room and put it down. It took a few days to settle in. I organized dishes, constructed a bookcase, and discovered which headlights belonged to passing cars and which to my neighbors. Calls and messages flooded my phone. Some were blunt and inquisitive, asking why I wasn't responding. I did nothing but let them pile up. James sent me an email a few days after the relocation. 3 people who claimed to be family had come to the old complex and asked for me, he wrote. They wanted to know if I was safe and where I was. They were only informed by the staff that no information could be shared and that the unit was empty. His message said that my mother's voice had risen. My father pressed for information until the conversation came to an end while my sister paced the lobby. I could see them in that office as I read his description, furious that a building treated them like strangers behind closed doors. I could no longer imagine the gap between my reality and their expectations. It was in a log and a policy that refused to accommodate them. I let the silence between us deepen as I put my phone face down on the table and closed the email. I finally took a call from a number I knew by heart a few days after James's email. Before I could say hello, my mother began to speak. She said that they had visited my previous complex, that nobody would talk to them, and that the staff had treated them like strangers. My father took over when she paused to catch her breath, asking me if I was okay, where I was now living, and why I had left them. When combined, they sounded more like people demanding a report from someone who had crossed the line than they did like people checking in. I took my time explaining myself this time. I assured them that I was safe, that I had moved across town to a new apartment, and that the office knew not to divulge my personal information. I explained that I had asked the employees of the old complex to withhold information from anyone who wasn't under my lease, and they had complied with my request. There was a brief silence. My mother then questioned why I would make it so hard for my own parents to get in touch with me, and I replied that if I had simply given them a new key, none of this would have happened. Then came the well-known labels. Cruel, dramatic, and ungrateful. According to my father, I was going too far and that family members did not behave in this manner. My voice remained even, but my chest felt constricted. What they called assistance had felt more like an inspection. I informed them that it wasn't considerate to enter my house while I was at work. Let my sister use it as a stopover without asking, or sneak through the gate behind strangers after the office had been told no. I could tell by those choices that they didn't consider me to be an adult with a door of my own. My sister's voice was louder then than it is now. I was turning independence into a show, she said, and I should be thankful that anyone wanted to come out for me at all. Everyone she knew relied on family. I still had to be receptive to her version of love. I didn't disagree with her examples. I declared that I had finished reliving the same exchange. I informed them that I would not be providing them with my new address and that I had relocated to feel secure in my own space. I added that I would consider it harassment rather than a concern if they attempted to locate me through my building or place of employment. The air on the line was altered by the word. My mom started crying. When I was grounded as a teenager, my father used to sigh like that. In a whisper, my sister said I was unreal. I didn't interpret their responses as evidence that I was mistaken. I said one last thing to them before I hung up. They would have to be on different terms if they ever wanted to be in a relationship with me again. No keys, no unexpected guests, and no more treating my house like a common area. Calls should only be made when invited, and messages shouldn't require immediate responses. No more ignoring no until they were prepared to do so. I required space. I then blocked their numbers and hung up. I then centered the rest of my life on that decision. I modified privacy settings, locked down social media, and asked a few reliable friends to refrain from disclosing personal information about me without first verifying. Building walls against people whose faces were in every picture album in my childhood home felt weird. However, it was also the first time that their mood did not affect how safe I felt. Without them, time passed. I went to work, got home, and became familiar with the noises of my new building. Coworkers who had nowhere else to go spent some of my holidays with me. Others by themselves with takeout and whatever film I wanted to watch. Occasionally, a cousin or aunt would send me an email stating that my parents were upset and perplexed. I once gave a one-sentence response. The repercussions for them were neither dramatic nor dramatic. I am safe. I hope they are well. I am not ready for contact. They maintained their routines, their home, and their tales of being good parents. Access was what they lost. There isn't a spare key available. No apartment in Miami to use as a handy starting point. There was no way they could cross my threshold simply to see how I was doing. For me, the repercussion was more subdued but nonetheless real. I had to mourn the sister I wished I could trust with a door code and the parents I wished I had. I had to come to terms with the fact that some people would prefer to lose you than learn to appreciate you, and I was unable to change that. Cutting contact is not, in my opinion, a straightforward solution or the best course of action for everyone. Some families pay attention when you say no, grow, and adapt. I hope you keep that if you have it. If not, though, I hope you keep in mind that you have the right to draw boundaries, even with those who brought you up. You don't have to be ungrateful to want privacy. You are not cruel if you want to be safe. I hope my story gives you the confidence to plan your boundaries and take your own needs seriously, rather than apologizing for them, if any part of it sounds familiar. I appreciate you sticking by me through everything. I'd like to know your thoughts on boundaries and family, if you don't mind. And I hope you stay for the next one, if you want to hear more tales like this. After my parents spent my college fund on my brother's legal bills, they demanded $25,000 for his rehab and I went hiking instead. After using my college funds to pay for my brother's third DUI and associated legal fees, my parents encouraged me to be thankful. I went out, made my own life, and settled my debt. Send $25,000 for his rehab or he'll die. They called years later, so I went hiking instead. Reddit, hello. My parents expected me to handle the aftermath after they spent years manipulating the world to fit my brother. At last, I moved away and started a new life. I assumed that would be the end of it. It wasn't. This is how it all began. Ryan is my name. Now that I'm in my early 30s, I have a reliable tech career that provides for my needs and lets me be by myself. I'm married, have a modest home, and lead a very typical life, but none of it originated in my childhood home. My family was not one to rely on, but one to survive. I discovered that early. Since I can remember, Tyler, my older brother, has been the focal point of everything. For a child like him, an ordinary morning could become a catastrophe before breakfast. Normal things for him include smashed doors, screaming tantrums, broken lamps, and school calls. He was either fighting someone or bashing holes in walls when he wasn't ranting. He was lying about something that didn't even require lying if he wasn't fighting. He was exactly that. And he was regarded like some fragile, misunderstood genius by my parents, Margaret and David. They pretended that everyone was making fun of Tyler whenever he got into trouble. He's sensitive, Margaret would remark. As though the rest of us were the issue, David added. People provoke him. In the meantime, I was a silent presence in the background. I didn't require much. Didn't make many requests. Apparently, I didn't deserve much either. I can still clearly recall when I first became aware of the difference. At the age of 7, I received a modest reading prize from my school. Just a certificate and a small ribbon, nothing special. While everyone else was being picked up, I stood by the door of the classroom. Tyler had damaged a cabinet door during a tantrum at home that morning. Margaret was therefore interacting with him. When she did arrive, she hurried by me in that impatient, clipped voice that usually conveyed the same message. She never even glanced at the ribbon in my palm, saying, "Get in the car, Ryan. I don't have time today." That kind of thing never occurred. They took place till it felt more like a rule and less like terrible timing. My experiences turned into May, followed by afterthoughts and background chatter behind whatever Tyler had ignited that week. I discovered that if I brought something home that I was proud of, I should keep it to myself because flaunting it too much only made it easier to overlook. I eventually ceased requesting their attendance. I became weary of seeing hope dissolve into shame, not because I didn't care. Somebody took note. David's older brother, my Uncle Luke. He was a mechanic who was always greasy and had a direct manner of speaking that didn't tolerate nonsense. He would nod at me when he passed by and ask, "You holding up, kid?" without seeming sorry for me. It was more like he was really curious. Luke was the only one who spoke the truth when Tyler would hurl something across the room or yell at everyone. "David, the boy's out of control," he would say. "You're not doing him any favors." David would always dismiss him with a theatrical comment about how difficult parenting is and how others don't get what we go through. Typically, Margaret would add something like, "Tyler is special. You wouldn't get it." However, one day stood out. After Tyler got into another altercation at school, David was furious with his teachers when he arrived home. Margaret drifted behind him as if tragedy were befalling them, rather than Tyler's repercussions. After taking a district-wide math test, I received a certificate. In any case, I placed it on the counter to see if anyone would notice. Without reading it, David dismissed it. Margaret didn't act at all. They chuckled when Tyler entered and boasted about hitting a child. "Not now, Ryan. Your brother is going through something serious." I genuinely laughed as if it were a humorous tale. His hair was ruffled by Margaret. "That's my boy," David exclaimed as I picked up my certificate off the ground. I realized then that I wasn't in a race with my brother. I was never going to prevail in the competition with their need to continue lying about him. Later that night, Luke arrived. He sighed after glancing at the wall dent and Margaret nursing Tyler on the couch. I hid in the garage, and he followed. "Don't let them make you small," he said. "You're not the problem here." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. However, it had never been spoken aloud by an adult before. That there was something unusual about the way my parents managed the household. They brought up that version of me, the child who discovered that it was preferable to vanish rather than challenge the household favorite. Our home felt like it was built on chaos by the time Tyler reached adolescence. There was a new mess every month. A neighbor at the door, a call from the school, and David pacing the kitchen as if his son had been singled out. Tyler wasn't the one who changed. My parents were involved. They ceased interrogating him. They stood up for him as if it were their duty. I witnessed such defense in public for the first time during a family get-together at my aunt's house. Paper plates, folding tables, children roaming about the yard. Tyler was tightly wrapped when he came. David continued to murmur, "Just be cool." Margaret watched Tyler as if she were anticipating the moment when everything would fall apart. We were together for around 20 minutes. Tyler was grounded once more, according to a cousin's prank. Tyler lost his temper. He growled and intervened, saying, "Say it again." My cousin gave a clumsy laugh. Tyler shoved him nonetheless, saying, "I'm kidding, man." One of the chairs scratched. Drinks spilled. There was silence in the yard. My aunt came running over. David approached my cousin first and said, "Stop it. Watch your mouth," he yelled. "Don't provoke him. Don't provoke him." My aunt shot back, "Provoke him?" Margaret, whose voice was already shaking, slipped in behind David and said, "He shoved my kid. Tyler's been dealing with a lot. He doesn't respond well to people mocking him." Mocking, that's the name she gave it. Uncle Luke moved away from the grill and used a rag to wipe his hands. He gave Tyler one glance. "Enough," he declared. Tyler snorted. "Mind your business." "It became my business when you put hands on family," responded Luke. David became agitated. Luke said without blinking, "He's having a hard time." Margaret growled, "You know what he's having?" "No consequences." Luke nodded as if he had anticipated it. Luke, not here. Right. Not here. Not anywhere. Tyler smirked and walked away, saying, "That's why this keeps happening." The group attempted to resume, tense and rigid. My aunt gave me a drink later. "How's school, Ryan?" "It's good," I said. She grinned and said, "I'm doing really well." Margaret showed there right away and said, "I heard you're top of your class." "That's amazing." "Ryan's fine," she blurted out. "Easy." Like, I didn't count. He's always been easy. In the yard, where Tyler was already fighting once more, David gave a nod. The years faded into the same script after that. Tyler's the one we worry about. He's got real struggles. Fights, suspensions, pilfered goods, irate phone calls. And my parents accusing teachers, neighbors, police, and everybody else who treated Tyler like a person accountable for his decisions. Tyler discovered that he didn't need to alter. All he needed to do was wait for the story to be rewritten. My life continued to unfold on the brink. As the highest student in my class at the end of the year, I received honors. They said they would show up. That afternoon, Tyler had a problem. They failed to appear. I didn't mention the award as I walked home after accepting it. Still, Luke heard. That evening, he came over and sat at our table as if my work were important. He remarked, "You did good." My birthdays went similarly. Don't let their chaos rewrite what you earned. One year, Tyler had been angry all day, so they didn't remember until the evening. "We'll celebrate later," David replied, thrusting money at me. We didn't. I attempted to say it quietly in 9th grade. Everything seems to revolve around Tyler. Margaret's expression grew stern. David said without looking up, "Don't start, Ryan." It was cemented when I graduated from 9th grade. You've got it easy. Be grateful. I glanced at the folding seats as I moved across the stage. They weren't present. They were cleaning up Tyler's most recent disaster across town. They assured me that I would be all right without them. I was. However, I quit waiting at that point. I knew where I fit within that house. By the time Tyler was in high school, my parents circled him like if he were the only thing in the universe, and he generated gravity. And before they forced me there, I learned to vanish. To themselves. Being seen first was not as safe as this. A few weeks after I graduated from high school, Tyler was arrested for the 3rd time for DUI on a Thursday night. On paper, the first 2 DUIs never stayed. In order to get them to settle for reduced penalties and second opportunities, my parents paid enough lawyers. However, he struck a parked car this time, and there were too many witnesses and too much damage for anyone to act as though nothing had happened. The house phone rang while I was working on college paperwork at the kitchen table. After answering, Margaret fell silent and then made a sound as if someone had sucked the air out of her. With trembling hands, she gave David the phone. "You've got to be kidding me," was all I heard, followed by, "My son wouldn't do that. That wouldn't be on him." He raised his voice to the point of almost yelling. Margaret was already crying when he hung up. Her words. "They're out to ruin him." However, the assessment was unambiguous. "He's not that kind of boy." Part 2. Officers discovered Tyler slurring and hardly able to stand after he smashed into a parked automobile and knocked it halfway up the curb. In his jacket pocket, they also discovered a tiny bag. The cops noted both the DUI and possession. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't someone else's jacket. It was Tyler, drunk and carrying something illegal. David refused to hear it. "Those cops planted it," he added, gesticulating in the kitchen. "He has endured years of harassment from them." Margaret held onto his arm. I watched as they rewrote reality in real time, saying, "They know he has issues. They take advantage. He's too trusting." What it was, they didn't call it. A child who had never experienced repercussions eventually reached a point where the system would not tolerate such behavior. The legal bill started the following morning. Tyler struck a local company owner's vehicle, causing substantial damage. Documents about court dates, fines, and required programs piled up, along with towing and storage expenses. David tossed out figures as if they didn't exist. Margaret nodded rapidly, as though speed made the statement true. "We'll get a lawyer, a real one, not some public defender trash. We'll work things out. We always do." That afternoon, I received a large envelope at home. Even before I opened it, I knew what it was. Acceptance. It was the first genuine item I had ever desired for myself. After ripping it open and reading the letter again, I had a feeling I hadn't had in years. Thrill. I carried it as I went downstairs. I got in. I said, "This is a good thing. I can now begin making plans." "So, can we look at the college fund?" The one Granny and Grandpa set up. The room fell silent. Margaret froze. David's expression changed as if I had spoken something hurtful. He sighed, a practiced sigh, and rubbed his brow. "Ryan," he murmured. "About that money." "About that money," I said. "What about it?" Margaret moved to the front. "Not all at once. It's gone. Bleeding out over the years in court bills, lawyer retainers, and emergencies they vowed were just temporary until nothing remained." At first, the word didn't land. I simply gazed at her. "Gone." "How?" yelled David. "Your brother needed assistance. Legal fees are expensive." I believed him to be kidding when he said, "We had to protect him." "It wasn't your fund," Margaret harshly said. "You used my college fund on Tyler's arrests." I held out the letter and said, "It was for the family and Tyler needed it more. He wouldn't survive prison." Margaret interrupted me, saying, "I've been planning for this since middle school. Grandma told me, don't bring her into this. She didn't know what Tyler would go through. So all of it." I replied, "Everything they saved for me." David approached me as if he were about to give me a lecture. "You're smart. You'll be fine. You'll get scholarships. You'll work. Real life isn't handed to you. But Tyler gets everything handed to him." Margaret's expression contorted as I said this. She used the word proud. "Don't talk about your brother like that. You should be proud we kept him safe." I'm glad they drained my only safety net since Tyler was unable to maintain sobriety long enough to avoid a crime. David shook his head as if I had let him down. Family takes over. I won't argue. Something clicked for me at that moment. You ought to want to assist. Every time they told me to be the easy one, every missed occasion, every birthday that was disregarded. Everything came to this point. Tyler wasn't the first to arrive. The only person who ever counted was him. I didn't shout. I refrained from arguing. I went back upstairs, picked up 2 bags, packed them with what I needed, and descended again. Margaret gazed at the bags as if incredulously. She said, "Where are you going?" "Somewhere that isn't here." "Ryan," David growled. "Don't be dramatic," I said, but I had already started to go. Outside, Luke appeared to have been waiting, leaning against his truck with his arms folded. He must have received a call, or perhaps he simply understood how our family's evenings like these ended. "You're done, huh?" he asked after glancing at the bags. "Yeah," I replied. He put a wad of bills, possibly a few hundred, into my hand after reaching inside his pocket. He motioned toward the house and said, "Take it. Get yourself set up somewhere. And listen to me, kid. You didn't break this family. They did." As I walked away, I didn't turn around. Nothing worth examining was present. I took 2 bags and enough money from Luke to buy food for maybe a week when I left my parents' house. Even though I had no knowledge how to live, I could rent a place because I was 21. I had no strategy. All I needed was some distance. A shared house on the outskirts of town was the most affordable option I could find. I had never met these 3 guys. We are all renting rooms in a place that is only kept together by good fortune and duct tape. The bathroom door hardly shut. The kitchen sink was always leaking. The living area also had that outdated takeout smell. Even if my room was too small to accommodate a folding table and a mattress, it was still mine. In less than a week, I was hired at a petrol station. It was difficult to deal with minimum salary, alternating shifts, and a manager who behaved like a shelf stalker. I didn't voice any complaints. For the first time, I felt like I was the only one who could save my life. Even though the rent was low, I was still barely getting by. On certain weeks, I would see single-digit figures when I opened my bank app. I started regularly incurring overdraft fees as a result of making incorrect assumptions about my financial situation. The food was easy. $2 prepackaged entrees, instant noodles, and whatever was on sale at the end of the week. I traveled everywhere by bus. The final bus home would sometimes fail to arrive. In the hopes that no one would follow me, I would walk back to the house for 40 minutes. I discovered how to stretch every dime till it broke. A few months later, I started working extra hours in a warehouse, loading trucks, stacking pallets, and doing whatever needed to be done. Although the pay was slightly higher, the labor left my hands and back hurting. I would wipe the dust and perspiration off when I got home, and as soon as I touched the mattress, I would fall asleep. The roommates were of no assistance. One man consumed everything that was left in the refrigerator. Playing loud games until 2 in the morning was another. We all had the same objective, but the third continued to smoke inside despite our protests. Make it through the month and pay the rent on schedule. That was sufficient to maintain harmony. I learned how to create a budget by repeatedly failing. After overspending, I would survive on peanut butter sandwiches until I got paid. I would have to forego a transit pass, pay a fee, and forget a bill. I gradually began keeping track, but it took effort, blunders, and silent frustration. There was a rigorous list tacked to the wall, a notebook, and a cheap calculator. Every 2 weeks, Luke came to see how I was doing. "You eating?" he would ask, glancing at my worn-out sneakers as he drove by in his truck. I would nod. He never gave lectures. He would give me tools and demonstrate how to extend, repair, or patch things. He helped me change hoses and belts in the driveway for an afternoon after I finally paid several $100s for a junky old car. I was able to get to work without using the bus, even though that automobile shook at every signal. I began to think about education once more, after barely making ends meet for nearly a year. In a sea of misfortune, the acceptance letter had been the one bright spot. Even though I no longer had a college fund, I still desired an alternative to carrying pallets or swinging a mop at 3 in the morning. Instead, I applied to a community college. Realistic, nearer, and less expensive. I wrote essays for scholarships, saved every additional dollar from working overtime, and completed financial assistance forms on a loaned laptop. It was like a door opening when the permission emails arrived. To begin, I signed up for a couple classes. Just enough to test my ability to mix it with work, nothing substantial. My days became roughly structured. Morning at the warehouse, afternoon at the gas station, evening class, home, study, sleep, repeat. Written down, it sounds awful, but it wasn't. I had a direction that wasn't determined by the mess of others for the first time in my life. Tyler continued to plummet in the meanwhile. Through Luke or my neighbors, I would learn about him. New charges, another crash, more battles. David and Margaret never altered their opinions. They made a few calls to me, always using the same strategy. Just guilt, no hello, no check-in. Margaret would remark, "Your brother is going through something tough," adding, "You should come home and help," David said. What is the help? Soothe him? Make a payment? As they acted as though he was all right, they sat in the background. After a while, I stopped responding. Every time I picked up, Tyler was the topic of conversation. They would send lengthy texts accusing me of deserting the family if I didn't. They never once inquired about my well-being. But I was no longer in need of them. That was the distinction. Things gradually stabilized with work and school. I made my rent payment on schedule. I gained real cooking skills. Vegetables, rice, and eggs from the bargain store. I learned how to handle my finances, fixed my own car, and determined which expenses were important and which weren't. I owed no one anything, but I also didn't have much. There were evenings when I sat at my small desk with my textbooks open and the house a flurry of activity all around me. And I came to a realization I had never experienced as a child. I was constructing something. Small, rough, shaky, but mine. I wasn't attempting to survive someone else's mess for the first time in my life. At last, I was creating my own life. One class and one shift at a time. I worked through all of it, so it took me longer than the 2 years required to finish community college. But in the end, I left with a transcript I was proud of and an associate's degree. After that, I transferred to a 4-year institution. Although it wasn't a well-known school, it was reliable, reasonably priced, and convenient enough for me to continue working weekends at the gas station and part-time shifts at the warehouse. On paper, my schedule seemed absurd, but by that point, I knew how to endure long days. Luke continued to stay in touch and would always be there to assist me with practical matters. Repairs for cars, apartment moves, and even minor tasks like changing a broken lock. He never gave it any thought. He would give me a tool and say, "Figure it out." After that, he would take a step back and let me figure it out. It was the first parenting style I had ever witnessed that truly entailed imparting knowledge. I met Ruby during my final year of college. During the extra hours they provided for students in need of money, I worked at the front desk of a campus building. One evening, she asked me the location of a particular lecture hall, and I gave her the answer. It wasn't impolite, but she hesitated before leaving and remarked, "You look exhausted. Long day. Lying was useless because of the way she looked at you. We kept bumping into each other, so I laughed and said something like, "Long month." She would bring an extra cup of coffee, study in the same building, and give it to me without asking if I wanted one. We struck up a conversation in between my shifts. Simple. Everyday talks, nothing dramatic. It felt weird just that. Someone being interested in me without wanting anything was something I wasn't used to. She didn't seem impressed or sorry for me after learning that I was working 2 jobs and attending school full-time. "You know, you don't have to downplay that, right?" she asked. It was the first time I had been called out for dismissing my own work. Following graduation, I secured my first full-time position in a manufacturing company's mid-sized IT department. Although the compensation wasn't great, it was in line with real weekends and health insurance. Luke's version of congrats was, "Good. Now, you can finally stop buying garbage tools." I texted him the news. Around that time, Ruby and I began dating more seriously. She assisted me in creating a budget that didn't depend on hasty decisions. She forced me to apply for jobs for which I didn't believe I was qualified. She didn't mince words when I had self-doubt. She would say, "Stop selling yourself short." It was the most direct thing anyone had ever said to me. The following year, we moved in together. It wasn't a significant choice. Splitting the rent made financial sense, because we were already spending the majority of our time together. In a way that didn't seem like drowning, she helped me restructure my student loans, set up auto-pay for bills, and arrange my papers. I took care of the food, the repairs, and the errands. It was successful. In the end, I made a proposal. A peaceful evening at home, a ring I had saved for, and a moment that seemed right, nothing dramatic. She grinned as she glanced at the ring. "Took you long enough." We were able to purchase a modest starter home with 2 incomes and careful saving. It wasn't elegant. It was ours, despite the little yard, threadbare carpet, and older siding. We replaced light fixtures and painted walls over the weekend. Ruby made her small reading nook. In the spare room, I put up a little desk. After helping us mend a loose railing with a toolbox, Luke stayed for dinner. During the first week, Luke visited. "You bought a house with loose railings and a crooked porch light," he stated. Ruby chuckled and said, "Good means you didn't overpay." Translation: "He is pleased with us." Luke let out a grunt. "Sure, that too." Despite everything, I continued to make consistent student loan payments. The balance decreased slightly each month. Ruby joined me in celebrating my victories, no matter how minor. I wasn't prepared for it to hit so hard when I paid the final payment. "Debt-free" was written in slightly crooked icing on a plain cake that Ruby made. We ate cake right out of the pan while seated at our kitchen table. And for the first time in my life, I thought I had arrived at a firm foundation. Margaret and David began to reappear around this time. Their communications had a distinctly different tone. Overly pleasant, overly courteous, as if they were making an excessive effort. Margaret replied, "You've built such a nice life." David texted me to ask if I wanted to stop over soon. "We're so proud of you, Ryan." The biggest red flag was that they failed to mention Tyler. Whenever my parents avoided discussing him, it indicated that there was a problem. After reading their words, Ruby was correct when she declared, "They want something." I had never received a check-in call from my folks. The warmth wasn't the friendliness. It served as bait. I could sense the hook approaching even though I didn't know what it was yet. I was unfazed by whatever was waiting, though. The one person who had always been honest with me, Luke, was still at my side, and I had a degree, a reliable job, a home, and a marriage that truly felt like a partnership. I had a foundation constructed all by myself for the first time in my life. And they had no involvement. Ruby and I were finishing supper on a random Tuesday night when the call came. Margaret was on the screen when my phone chimed. It had been years since I had heard her voice. Ruby's eyebrows went up. "Are you going to answer?" "Yeah," I replied. Margaret didn't even greet them, saying, "Let's see what they want." "Ryan. It's your brother," she said without thinking. Her voice was urgent and piercing. "He needs help again. It's serious this time." David's voice broke through the background before I could respond. I entered the corridor and said, "Tell him to stop dragging his feet. We don't have time for this." Margaret sniffed sharply. "What's going on?" When she desired something, she would cry like this. "Tyler is struggling. He's been through so much lately." "That's not an answer," I replied. David reached for the telephone. "Listen, Ryan, there's a facility, a really good place, 9-month program, cost $25,000. We need you to cover it." I silently chuckled. "Because you can," David said. "Why would you think I'd do that? You've got a house, a good job, a stable life. You owe it to your family. You owe it to your family." "Oh, we said to who? For what?" Margaret's voice came back out of nowhere. "To us," she added. "We raised you. We supported you. Your life turned out well because we gave you structure." I was staring at the wall. "Structure?" "Yes," the woman replied. "We made sacrifices for Tyler." I clarified. She refused to admit it. "Family helps family. Ryan. You didn't help me," I said. David's tone changed from entitled to annoyed as he said, "Not once. Don't start rewriting history. You're doing well now. You can afford to help your brother. $25,000 is not helping. That's a bailout. He needs you." Margaret begged. At that moment, I heard my phone ring with notifications and voicemails from Tyler, saying, "He won't survive without treatment." Margaret continued talking, one after the other. "If you don't step up, he could hurt himself." I heard one of Tyler's texts before responding. "Ryan, man, just help me, dude. You don't get it. Everything sucks right now. Mom and Dad said you would help. Come on, don't leave me like this." Another message. "You think you're better than me? You're not. You had everything handed to you. I should have gotten that money. Not you." A third time. "I swear I'll do something stupid if no one helps me. Is that what you want? Is it?" It was anarchy. Blaming, threatening, and pleading all at once. Typical Tyler. I returned the phone to my ear. Margaret gasped as if I had admitted to a crime when I said, "I'm not paying for rehab." David began to raise his voice, saying, "How could you say that? He's your brother. You selfish little. After everything we did for you. This is how you repay us." "What exactly did you do for me?" I inquired. "Name one thing." A long pause. Then David lost it. "You think you got where you are without us? You think you built that life alone? We gave you a foundation." "No," I replied. Margaret sobbed and said, "Luke gave me a foundation. I built everything else myself." Her voice became weak and high. "You've turned cold. Ruby changed you. You used to be sweet. You used to care about this family." From the kitchen, Ruby heard David say, "He wouldn't talk like this if she didn't poison him." I remained calm, but Ruby remarked, "Wow, charming." David warned, "You walk away from this. I'm hanging up now." I said, "You made that decision years ago, and hung up. And you're no son of mine." Tyler continued to leave voicemails. Messages are lengthy and inconsistent, alternating between sobbing, shouting, accusing, and meandering apologies. He was blocked by me. I then blocked David and Margaret. Ruby took a seat on the couch next to me. I said, "Yeah. You okay?" "Just tired of the same cycle." My extended family blew up the following morning. I awoke to Facebook notifications, group conversations, and texts replete with accusations and guilt. None of these individuals had done anything for me as a child. "How could you abandon your brother? Your parents sacrificed so much. You're heartless. You think you're better than the rest of us now?" During my years of struggling to make ends meet, none of them had ever appeared, but suddenly they had a lot to say. I wrote a lengthy email as a result. I enumerated every time my parents had neglected me using Tyler as an excuse, including every rehab, jail, and debt. I talked about how they depleted my education funds, how I had to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, and how they had never once inquired about my well-being. I used just one statement to wrap things up. If you believe in helping Tyler so much, the rehab needs $25,000. There were about 15 of you blowing up my phone. So split it up and it's about $1,800 each. I pushed the send button. No one responded with an offer of cash. I blocked all of the texts I received, which included things like "You're cruel. You're embarrassing the family. You're twisted for putting money over blood." Ruby placed a cup of tea in front of me later that evening. "Luke gave a call." I nodded as she remarked, "He said you did the right thing." "Good." It took days for the storm to subside. In order to message me, Tyler started making fresh accounts. David and Margaret attempted to contact each other from separate numbers. Family members attempted to make nebulous online complaints. Everywhere they went, chaos followed. Regardless of how far I had come. However, I didn't feel dragged into it for the first time. There was nothing that I owed them. I was spared from being engulfed by their catastrophe once more. I was no longer responsible for their crisis. 9 months after that last phone call, Tyler overdosed. There was no big warning, no build-up, simply an early morning message from an unidentified number. "This is Officer Harris. We must notify you that your brother Tyler was discovered dead." The remainder of the statement was lost in formal terminology and logistical information. After saying thank you, I hung up and sat silently on the bed's edge. With her hair still disheveled from sleep, Ruby entered. "What happened, Tyler?" I replied, "He's gone." She did not ask any further questions as she sat next to me. Anyhow, there wasn't much to say. I wasn't surprised by the conclusion because his life had been one long crash course. Yes, it's sad. No, shocking. Margaret didn't give a call. David didn't either. I didn't think they would. Most likely, they were too preoccupied with determining who was at fault this time. A cousin I hardly knew sent me a funeral notice. Over my shoulder, "Ruby, read it." She said, "You going?" "No." She nodded as if she had anticipated that response. Ruby and I headed to a hiking route about an hour away from our house rather than dressing in black and listening to speeches about a non-existent version of Tyler. In some ways, the weather felt more honest since it was clean, chilly, and quiet, the kind of day that didn't fit the gravity of what had transpired. We traveled miles on foot. There was only the sound of leaves beneath our feet and the occasional bird above, no deep discussion or dramatic reflections. Ruby paused somewhere on the ridge and gave me a look. "You all right?" she asked, taking my hand. "I don't know," I replied, "but this feels better than pretending we were close." The hike wasn't symbolic because I didn't intend it that way. You gave enough to that family. This moment is yours. For the first time, it wasn't about anyone else, which made it symbolic. Just breathing, no pressure, guilt, repairing, or rescue. My phone buzzed with an unknown number later that afternoon. I knew who it was without having to save it. David and Margaret had already attempted to call from separate phones. Ruby softly glanced at me and asked whether I wanted to respond. Saying, "I'll deal with it now." I went outside and picked up. David remained silent. "You didn't come," he uttered in a tight voice. "No," I answered. There was a long silence, followed by a trembling breath. "He was your brother. He was also your responsibility, not mine. We lost him, Ryan." "You lost him a long time ago," I replied. With a husky voice, Margaret answered the phone and said, "This is just the end of the same story. We made every effort. You have no idea how difficult it was." "I understand more than you think," I replied. She took a deep breath. "How could you not come?" "Because I stopped being part of that world a long time ago." She wasn't going to argue. She didn't scream. She only breathed erratically, as if she wanted to say something but was unable to do so. I was the first to end the call. The backlash started 2 weeks after the funeral. Extended family members gave me tidbits of information. David and Margaret had arguments with almost everyone. David became enraged at Tyler's former pals for swaying him. Margaret claimed that years ago, the rehab facility turned them away. It doesn't matter that half the time Tyler didn't want to go. They destroyed relationships with family members, neighbors, and even those who attempted to console them. Their lifelong denial combined with grief created a maelstrom that no one wanted close to them. Then came the financial harm. There had been 2 mortgages on the residence. Maxed out credit cards. Legal debts from the past reappeared. They were unable to keep up. They eventually lost the house completely. Ruby received a link to the auction listing from someone. We didn't click on it. Luke stayed in touch more often than normal during all of this. One weekend, he dropped by with a pizza and placed the box on the countertop. He asked incoherently, "You hear about your folks? They're not taking anything well, but that's not on you." I know. He looked at me for a moment. You did right by your own life, Ryan. Not many people climb out of what you climbed out of. I grinned. He didn't typically express strong emotions, but before he went, he put a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Thanks, Luke. I'm proud of you," in case no one ever said that. More than anything my parents had ever said, that stuck with me. Ruby discovered an envelope with no return address in our mailbox a month later. There was a weak handwritten letter from Margaret and David inside. Standing in the kitchen. I read it. We made decisions we believed were correct, but they ended up harming both of our sons, Ryan. We failed Tyler and you. Ruby observed my reaction and said, "We're sorry. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope someday you'll understand. Anything you want to say back?" "No," I replied. "Do you feel okay?" There's nothing to reply to. I feel nothing. Not relief, not forgiveness, not anger, just distance. A flat, steady distance that wasn't cold. Last but not least, closure isn't a door locking shut. Rather, it's the realization that the door no longer matters. My parents used to be a part of my life, but they are no longer. The tragedy, the consequences, and the regrets were theirs. Later that night, Ruby leaned against me as we sat on the porch with the lights off, listening to passing cars. "You did everything you could," she said. "I did everything that was mine to do," I said. Peace doesn't come from fixing the past. My life, the one they never helped build, was still standing. It results from at last leaving it. And I had done so entirely. Please click subscribe if you like this video. It really benefits the channel and enables us to provide you with more and better stories. Thank you. My wife stayed silent when her son called me a loser. Later I found she'd opened credit in my name, so I stopped everything. I didn't raise my voice when my stepson yelled, "He ruined my life," as he stood up red-faced in the church fellowship hall. I simply placed a simple manila folder on the table that folds. The room fell silent. I'm Frank Delaney, a 59-year-old man who grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana South. Throughout my professional life, I have hauled freight for UPS on early mornings, night runs, and other types of jobs where your hands get a touch dry and crack no matter how much lotion you apply. I'm not ostentatious. I have never been. I prefer to pay my payments on time, have a clean truck, and have black coffee. When the sump pump fails or someone needs a ride at 3:15 inches the morning, I'm the one that comes over. And that was sufficient for a very long time. The fragrance of coffee that had been left on the warmer for too long and crock-pot chili filled the fellowship hall. Plastic forks and paper plates were available. A small amount of fruit punch had been spilled by someone's child close to the coat rack. Even though it was chilly outside in February, I could hear the faint sound of the old ceiling fans. Winter in Indiana has a way of eating away at your bones. The kind of cold that makes you feel more mature than you actually are. My stepson, Tyler Vaughn, stood approximately 12 feet away from me, his shoulders squared as if he wanted to fight. 27 years old. Slender, with nice hair and teeth, he was the type of child who had heard the phrase potential all his life, and used it as if it were a rent check. He said loudly enough for everyone in the room, "You don't get to act like you're the victim. You took everything." I didn't take anything," I calmly remarked. "My car, my phone, my apartment." Even I was shocked by my voice. It wasn't unsteady. It wasn't upset. It was simply level. I stopped spending money on things that I had never been able to afford. Tyler stared at my wife, Elaine Parker, like a child seeking a referee. With her hands encircling a foam cup as if it were the only solid object in the world, Elaine stood by the coffee maker. She remained silent. She has been doing that a lot lately. My narrative didn't start that day in the hallway. A long, silent path came to an end. But you have to accompany me back to the dinner table where I discovered the value of my quiet if you want to know why a room full of churchgoers fell silent over a manila folder. The roads were still busy on this Friday night, the kind that makes Fort Wayne feel like it's half asleep. Elaine texted me after I finished my run. "Roadhouse in Texas. 6:45. Tyler will arrive. Don't start anything. Please." I hadn't begun anything in years, so that statement, "Please don't start anything," already made my stomach turn. I had been ingesting substances. I had been doing that. With a large parking lot, eye-catching signs, and the aroma of fried food wafting into the chilly air each time the door opened. Texas Roadhouse was situated off a strip of stores that resembled every other Midwestern strip. The wind blew across the lot in a horrible sideways direction. As I entered, I could feel it go beneath my collar. It was noisy and warm inside. People laughing, servers scuttling between tables with baskets of rolls, country music, the kind of setting you're meant to unwind in. Elaine was already there, wearing her gray mirror fleece, her hair pushed back, and the lines around her eyes that I used to find endearing. Wearing a brand new hoodie and pricey sneakers, Tyler sat across from her, tapping his phone as if he were the reason the world was running late. When I slid into the booth, he hardly looked up. I said, "Hey." Elaine said, "Hey," as if she were ticking a box. Tyler remained silent. He simply grinned and continued to scroll. We were given menus by a server. I didn't require one. I received the same thing every time. Baked potato, side salad, and sirloin. The chicken creatures pleased Elaine. Like he was proud, Tyler ordered something with more bacon. It was small talk at start. Elaine inquired about my route. Near Warsaw. I said, the roads were slippery. Tyler discussed a significant online opportunity he had with a friend. Did you hear from your dad this week? Elaine gently inquired. At that moment, Tyler relaxed as if he had been anticipating it. Yeah, he responded, perhaps loud enough for the table next to us to hear. Dad is doing quite well. He recently received a new lease. Nice location. Additionally, he has a new girlfriend. He gave me that expression as if he was ready to tell something he had been holding back. Elaine's gaze briefly shifted to me before settling on her water glass. Tyler bent over. Are you curious about Dad's words? I can't believe Mom settled. He remarked. The heat began to rise up my neck. It was more akin to shame than anger, like if someone had poured warm soda down my back. Tyler. Elaine muttered. And he waved her away. No, I mean it. He looked directly at me and said, Come on, Mom. You act like this is some nice little family. My dad isn't a loser, but you are. The word loser lingered. Somewhere behind me, all I could hear for a moment was a fork scraping across a plate. The sound of ice clinking in a glass. The background music is a country song. Life continues. I gave Elaine a look. I held out. She didn't even raise her head. She gazed at her water glass as if it contained instructions. Tyler's remarks didn't have the same impact as her quiet. Right then, I could have lost it. I had the option to get up and leave. I had the option of saying something scathing. However, I didn't, as I had been the man who maintained order for years. The man who took in the sharp edges, so that everyone else may continue to smile. So I took my usual action. I said nothing. As if I needed it, I picked up my menu. I used my nose to breathe. Don't make a scene. I told myself. Don't give them an excuse to portray you negatively. Tyler grinned as if he had won. Let's just eat. Elaine finally whispered, and I nodded as if I hadn't just been killed in a booth with neon beer signs. However, something changed inside. It feels more like a bolt loosening than a big movie scene. Quietly beginning to give. Something that had been keeping things together. The wind hit us once more in the parking lot as we were leaving. With her arms crossed, Elaine moved forward. Tyler opened his shiny-rimmed, late-model automobile, which he handled like a trophy. His credit was so bad that I had signed for the same automobile. I had insured the same vehicle. I had seen him drive the identical car as if it didn't matter if it lived or died. He didn't even wish me a good night. He entered and exited as if the regulations didn't exist. Elaine climbed into my vehicle. My previous Silverado was sturdy, tidy, and uncomplicated. That's how I kept it. There was a slight fragrance of motor oil and coffee in the cab. My life in a nutshell. For a few miles, we drove in silence. Warm air was blown over my hands on the steering wheel by the heater. Elaine concluded by saying that he has experienced a lot. I exhaled. I have to. She didn't respond. I glanced at her at a red light. Do you believe that was acceptable? What did he say? Her jaw stiffened as she looked straight ahead. Please. Frank. I'm worn out. I'm not interested in fighting. Her gift was that. Quiet. Always keep quiet when it's important. I faced the road once more. The light shifted. We continued driving. I entered the kitchen after we arrived home and gazed at the small pile of mail on the counter. A credit card offer, an electric bill, Meyer coupons, and everyday living. It felt like betrayal, even though nothing in that pile appeared to be it. Without saying another word, Elaine left into the bedroom. Behind her, the door clicked slightly. With the slight buzz of the TV in the living room and the hum of the refrigerator, I stood by myself in the kitchen. A meteorologist is discussing wind chill. It was a constant, almost calming sound. I finally acknowledged what I had been avoiding for years with that steady sound. It was more than just contempt. They were using me. Because Tyler didn't suddenly label me a loser. He knew I would accept it. So he called me that. Since he was aware that I would continue to cover the expenses that maintained his life comfortable. Because every time he stepped over a line, he'd seen his mother turn away. He had also discovered that there were no repercussions. Not authentic ones. I opened the drawer in the small desk near the corridor that evening after Elaine had gone to sleep. The drawer of vital papers. It had been months since I had touched it. Titles, insurance cards, and receipts that I couldn't discard because I still harbored the hope that someone might one day comment, "Wow, Frank, you really did a lot, we're all within." I took out the folder containing Tyler Vaughn's automobile, my name on the documents, my loan signature, and my accountability. The home was silent as I sat at the kitchen table with that folder. I didn't have trembling hands. They remained stable. And I didn't feel like a loser for the first time in a long time. I felt like a finished man. I woke up earlier than my alarm the following morning. That wasn't out of the ordinary. I have a lot of experience with night routes. The clock in my body didn't trust sleep. However, I refrained from checking my phone for any missed calls or messages from Tyler Vaughn this time. I listened to the house while I laid there. There was a deep grumble as the furnace turned on. A pickup cranked up and rumbled off somewhere down the block. Even Elaine Parker's breathing was next to me. Facing the wall. Silently. I rose and made my way to the kitchen. My feet were on a chilly floor. As usual, I poured myself a cup of black coffee and took a seat at the table where I had laid out Tyler Vaughn's documents the previous evening. Everything was crisper, less dramatic, and more honest in the daylight. I wasn't upset. I was shocked by that. I sensed a sense of clarity, the kind that comes after a long journey. When the exit sign you've been waiting for appears at last. Once more, I opened the manila folder. My name, the car title, simple and uncomplicated. Insurance declarations page, my address, my policy number, phone plan, family account, 6 lines mine, paying for all of them, storage unit contract, my signature, my checking account, apartment lease, amendment, me designated as co-signer, the responsible party. It was not a single major event. Every month, it was death by 1,000 tiny withdrawals. I reflected on the past few years. At the time, the excuses had always seemed plausible. Only until he is able to stand again. Until his credit gets better. Only till everything calms down. They didn't. I put on a jacket and drove to the VFW at around 9:30. There were areas of dirty snow heaped along the perimeter of the parking lot, which was less than half full. It smelled like floor cleaning and old coffee inside. The bartender gave me a nod. I sat down at a table by the window and waved him away. A few minutes later, Walt Harrigan entered. He walked steadily but slowly, hands like cinder blocks, white hair cropped close, retired Teamster. When I originally recruited him, he was a union representative, the type of man who could clear his throat and close a room. He lowered himself into the chair across from me and remarked, "You look like hell." I said, "I feel better than I look." He arched an eyebrow. "That's novel." I told him about Elaine Parker peering into her water as if it were safer than looking at me, about the supper, and about the word loser. Walt didn't say anything. With his fingers encircling his mug, he simply listened. He gave me a single nod when I was done. "You know why it hurt so much?" I half joked, because it was true. "No," he replied. "He was able to say it because you helped teach him." That hit the ground hard. I turned to face my hands. "I don't want to make a big deal out of nothing." Walt reclined. "You're not talking about blowing anything up, Frank Delaney. You're referring to leaving the blast zone." I let out a breath. "He's going to fall hard if I stop paying for things." Walt looked directly into my eyes. "He's not being punished by you. The cover-up is being stopped by you. Being harsh is not the same as refusing to make someone feel at ease when they treat you disrespectfully." I took a time to consider that. "How about Elaine Parker?" I inquired. Walt gave a shrug. "She must determine whether her silence is a sign of cowardice or loyalty." His remarks stuck with me on the way home, preventing the cover-up. That was how it felt. It seemed as if I had been smoothing over visible fissures. That day, I didn't accomplish anything. I was concerned about that. No impulsive actions, No flamboyant phone calls. Like every other Saturday, I went to the grocery store, loaded up the truck, returned home, and folded laundry. Elaine Parker observed me intently, as if she sensed a shift, but she was reluctant to inquire. "You've been quiet," she said that evening. It nearly made me giggle. "Keep quiet." "That was wealthy," I said. "I've been thinking." She gave a nod. "Regarding yesterday night?" "A lot of nights," I remarked. "About what I am and am not accountable for." End quote. She clenched her jaw. "Please don't start making things more difficult, Frank. Tyler Vaughn is already having difficulties." I glanced at her, then took a closer look. "I am, too." Her mouth parted, then shut again. Once more, silence. I went to bed early. It was difficult to fall asleep. I took a legal paper and sat back at the kitchen table on Sunday morning to begin jotting things down. Like a checklist, but not a hit list. Dates, account numbers, notice requirements, signature requirements, and decisions that were up to me. I wasn't upset. I used caution. I messaged Tyler Vaughn once. Only one. "Hey. I will no longer be paying for the phone plan or auto insurance starting next month. I'll let you know the precise date so you can make the switch. Just a heads up, this isn't a fight." He took a while to reply. I copied Elaine Parker on another message I sent. "I'm establishing some financial boundaries. I want you to understand that this isn't about power. Respect is at issue." For hours, that one remained unread. By nightfall, Tyler Vaughn finally responded, "Are you serious?" "Yes," I typed back. 3 dots appeared, vanished, and then reappeared. "I guess I know where I stand," I said. I waited for the customary twinge of guilt as I gazed at the screen. It never materialized. Rather, I sensed a solid sensation in my chest. It's more like alignment than alleviation. My behavior was consistent with what I had been ingesting for years. Elaine Parker gave it another go that evening. She remarked, "You're overreacting," from the doorway of the bedroom. That was not his intention. I tied my boots without looking up. He said what he meant to say. She folded her arms. "This family will be embarrassed by you." I got up. "No, I will no longer pretend." She observed me as if I were a stranger. Perhaps I was. The air was clear and crisp when I went for my nighttime run. I inhaled deeply before getting inside the automobile. The cab light came on and went off. My phone buzzed as I turned onto the street. Tyler Vaughn sent a text message. "Elaine Parker won't pardon you if you do this." After reading it once, I placed the phone in the cup holder, face down. I drove into the night without being burdened by anyone else for the first time in years. And I had a gut feeling that the truth would become apparent as soon as I stopped funding the illusion. It was a quiet, gray Monday morning, the kind of winter morning when the sky appears to be undecided. After my run, I went to sleep for a few hours. When I woke up, I heard Elaine Parker moving around the house and opening and closing cabinets a bit too loudly. I remained silent. She didn't either. I returned to the kitchen table with my legal pad by midday. After sleeping on it and mentally reviewing it twice, it was time to tackle the tedious yet crucial part. This was not an act of retaliation. It had to do with protocol. The insurance company was contacted first. The woman on the line knew my name because I had been with them for more than 22 years. She tapped the keys and said, "Frank Delaney. How may I help you today?" With effect from the following billing cycle, I stated, "I need to remove a vehicle from my policy. I'll also need an email with a written confirmation." "No issue," she replied. "It's the 2021 sedan. Just to be clear, that's the one." She hesitated. "My stepson is currently the driver of that car." "I'll be notifying him," I said. "All right," she said, in a professional manner. "You have all the rights you need." It was like a tiny hand on my shoulder when you said, "Within your rights." The phone plan came next. The same thing. Dates and confirmations. No shouting or speeches. In order to prevent Tyler Vaughn from claiming that I caught him off guard, I requested the precise time the service would end. The storage unit comes next. I personally drove over, the wind slicing through my jacket as I went through the parking lot. The manager was a young man with eyes that were tired. I presented the contract and my ID to him. I said, "I need to set up a supervised access window for the secondary user." He nodded and said, "And then I want the lock code changed." It occurs frequently. I was always surprised by that. I had half of my list crossed off by mid-afternoon. I was exhausted, but not as sick to my stomach as I had anticipated. It felt more like I had cleaned a garage all day. Dusty. Exhausting. But sincere labor. At approximately 4:40, Tyler Vaughn finally made a call. "What on earth is this?" he yelled. "I just received an email from my insurance company." I said, "I promised to give notice." He said, "You're screwing me. I need the car for work, as you are aware." "That part's no longer on me," he remarked. "You need insurance to drive it. This is your way of punishing me." I reclined in my chair and gazed at the kitchen wall scuff mark. "I'm taking this action because I'm tired of paying for things that make me feel disrespected." Silence fell for a beat. Then he laughed bitterly and sharply. "You're really picking this hill, wow." "No," I replied. "You made the decision to call me a loser." He hung up after swearing. With my phone still in my hand, and my heart pounding more forcefully than I liked, I sat there for a while. The part I had been dreading, the point at which doubt tries to creep in, was finally here. I nearly gave him a call back. Nearly. Rather, I picked up the apartment lease, which was the last item on my list. It took longer this time. I informed the property management office over the phone that, in accordance with the terms of the contract, I was a co-signer who had to withdraw. The woman explained the procedure and sent me a form via email. She stated, "He'll have to prove himself or provide a new guarantor. We'll send out a notice until then." "Comprehensive," I replied. I slid the printed email into the folder along with the others. Elaine Parker finally spoke that night. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and remarked, "You've really done it." "I'm doing it," I clarified. She gave a headshake. "Frank." He called me crying. I gave her a look. Was what he said to me mentioned? She turned her head away. "You are aware of the way he becomes anxious." I replied, "So do I. I simply don't get away with it." She spoke up. "You're causing him anxiety." I didn't raise mine. "He is 27 years old." She looked at me as if she hadn't seen me before. Perhaps she didn't. Tyler Vaughn's panic began to manifest that evening. A text first. "I don't have a ride, so my boss says I'm going to be late again." Then another. "I have 3 days, according to storage, to retrieve my belongings. Are you happy now, then?" I didn't respond. 3 days later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was the office in the apartment. "Mr. Your stepson did not meet the requalification requirements, Delaney," the woman said. "We've sent out a notice. Just to keep you updated." "Thanks," I replied. I noticed Tyler Vaughn's car parked crookedly in our driveway that same afternoon, with a bright orange notice tucked under the wiper. No insurance. I was not arrogant when I saw it. I was worn out. "You didn't have to let it get this far," Elaine Parker said softly as she sat on the edge of the bed later that evening. I switched off the light. "It came this far a long time ago. I simply stopped acting as though it hadn't." The consequences finally lined up 9 days after the dinner. Tyler Vaughn's job was terminated. Just an attendance policy with no room for excuses. Nothing dramatic. By morning, the car had been legally towed after being left on the street without insurance. His phone died. The storage unit was locked. Not having a job, a car, or a place to live. That morning, as I watched steam rise from my coffee while standing at the kitchen sink, I experienced a twist in my stomach. Not contentment, not regret. Accountability. The mail then arrived. A certified envelope bearing my name and the bank logo in the corner was among the flyers and bills. I placed it on the table, signed for it, and just stared. It had been years since I had opened a new account. I read the first line after breaking the seal. "We're getting in touch with you because of some recent activity on your account." I had the uneasy feeling that I was going to find out what Tyler Vaughn had lost that week, and my chest went cold. It wasn't just him who had been using my name as if it were his own. I took a while to open the envelope. With my fingers resting on the edge of the paper as if it might bite me if I moved too quickly, I stood at the table. It was Elaine Parker taking a shower. The house hummed as usual. Furnace and refrigerator. The wall clock ticked faintly. Common noises, the ones that typically indicate everything is all right. I used my thumb to cut a hole in the envelope and took out the letter. Our credit union sent it. Professional, courteous, and using language that subtly conveys that everything is fine while acting as though nothing is. Regarding recent activity on an account that was registered in my name, they were contacting me. 5 months ago, a store credit line was established. Maximum balance. Late payments. I took a seat. This time, I read it more slowly. The dates coincided with my travel nights. Elaine Parker stated that she was simply exhausted at night. Tyler Vaughn had been working things out at night. I looked over the fine print. My address, phone number, and social security number were all on the application, but my signature was missing. At last, my hands began to shake. Elaine Parker stopped when she saw my face after entering the kitchen with a towel wrapped around her hair. "What's the matter?" she inquired. I moved the letter over the table. She picked it up, glanced at it, and then gave me the look as if I had just accused her of a horrible thing. "What's this?" I said, "That's what I'm asking." With a sigh, she put the letter aside. "You make assumptions, Frank." "Elaine, whose store card is this?" She paused. Even though it was only a split second, I had mastered the art of identifying a crucial pause from years of transporting cargo. "It isn't anything," she stated. Tyler Vaughn required assistance. Just something to help him get through it. "You call me by name." She crossed her arms. "You always assist him." I got to my feet. My voice was strong, but my knees were weak. Lying is not the same as helping. Opening accounts behind my back is not the definition of helping. She turned to face the floor. "I assumed you wouldn't mind." No matter how much Tyler Vaughn insulted me, that sentence hit me harder. She said again, softer. "I didn't think you'd mind," as if that improved the situation. "You never refuse." At that moment, something broke. Just a crisp snap inside my chest, no noise, no drama. "That's all," I said. I got that by remaining silent. At last, she looked directly into my eyes. "Please don't exaggerate this, Frank." One sharp, ugly laugh came out of my mouth. "In my name, you open credit. It is merely a card," she stated. "We can settle it." "We." Once more. That word. I grabbed my keys. "I'm heading out." "Where?" I said, to make sure there aren't any more surprises. With my hands firmly gripping the wheel, I drove to the credit union. It was a low, white sky, the kind that weighs you down. It smelled like printer ink and carpet cleaner inside. Mary Ann Cole, a loan officer who appeared to be around my age, didn't flinch when I told her what I had discovered. With a frown on her face, she brought up my file. "There are several," she remarked softly. My stomach fell. "My information is linked to 2 store cards, and 1 short-term installment loan that are all open within 8 months. None of this was authorized by me." "I believe you. We see this a lot," she said. She guided me through the steps, explaining that there were family situations that hurt more than the numbers. Credit freeze paperwork and fraud affidavits. Just careful, slow work to stop the bleeding, nothing spectacular. Elaine Parker was waiting for me when I arrived home. "Are you truly acting in this way?" Eyes wide, she questioned, accusing it of fraud. I declared, "I'm stopping it and I'm calling it what it is." Her voice broke. "You will destroy him. You 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 will destroy him." I gave a headshake. "You've already shown him that it's acceptable." Ampre-4ing. Ampre-4. Ampre-4ing. Ampre-4. I slept on the couch that night. I needed time to reflect without someone telling me about my own life, not because she asked. I discovered the messages the following day. I wasn't prying. A notification appeared on her tablet, which glowed on the coffee table. In the preview, I saw my name. "Frank will take care of it. He does it every time." It was sent months ago from Tyler Vaughn to Elaine Parker. At first, I didn't read any more. I felt as though I had been struck deep inside as I sat there with the tablet glowing in my hands. It got worse when I scrolled. "This month, don't worry about the rent. Simply write it under Frank's name on the card. He detests conflict. He refuses to speak." I carefully put the tablet down. I was seated at the table when Elaine Parker arrived home from work. In front of me, the manila folder was open. The printed messages, the statements, and the letters from the credit union. In the doorway, she paused. She said, "You read my messages." I said, "You used my name." The gap between us was greater than the room as we stood there. She claimed, I was defending my son. And who was keeping me safe? I inquired. She didn't respond. I realized then that there was no peaceful way out of this situation. What had been done in silence could not be undone by swallowing it. I didn't shout. I made no threats. I told her exactly what was going to happen. I'm separating our finances. I said. I'm freezing my credit. I'm documenting everything. And I'm done covering for Tyler Vaughn. I'm separating our finances. Her complexion turned pallid. You're going to humiliate us. I gave a headshake. I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm done lying. She sank into a chair. You're choosing this over your family. I picked up the folder and closed it. No, I'm choosing myself. For the first time that night, I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a house after a storm, from standing but stripped down to the studs. But I also felt something else, a certainty I hadn't felt in years. The next step wouldn't be private. And the truth, once it had room to breathe, was going to speak for itself. The fellowship hall at Streetmark sat behind the brick church like it always had, low ceiling, beige walls, folding tables lined up and in. On Sundays like this, it filled up with crockpots and paper plates, and people who'd known each other long enough to stop pretending. It was the kind of place where the truth didn't echo. It just settled. Elaine Parker insisted we go. She said it would look bad if we didn't. A potluck fundraiser for the roof repairs. Everyone from her side of the family would be there. Neighbors, too. People from work, people who smiled and nodded and thought they knew us. I agreed to go because I knew something she didn't. I wasn't afraid of how things would look anymore. The hall smelled like chili and baked ham. Someone had brought deviled eggs, coffee brewed in big metal urns that hissed softly. The hum of conversation filled the room, broken now and then by laughter. Tyler Vaughn was already there when we walked in. He stood near the long table of food, shoulders tight, jaw set, talking fast to anyone who would listen. I could hear my name float through the air, carried on the edge of accusation. That man took everything, he said, left me with nothing, no warning, just pulled the rug out. People nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. A few glanced my way. Elaine Parker stayed close to me, her hand hovering near my arm like she might grab it if I bolted or if I spoke. Tyler Vaughn saw us, and his face lit up, not with relief, but with anger sharpened by an audience. There he is, he said loud. Mr. Responsible. The room quieted without anyone meaning it to. That's how it happens in small places. People stop chewing. They stop clinking forks. They wait. You want to explain to everyone why you ruined my life? Tyler Vaughn demanded. I didn't answer right away. I set the manila folder down on the nearest table. Plain. No labels. No drama. I didn't ruin anything, I said. But if you want to talk about it, we can. Tyler Vaughn laughed bitter. Oh, now you want to talk? Yes, I replied. Now, he threw his hands out. He took my car, my phone, got me kicked out of my apartment. I lost my job because of him. I said, my job because of him. I nodded once. You lost your job because you didn't show up on time. That got a few murmurs. Elaine Parker shifted beside me. Frank. I held up a hand, not to stop her, but to steady myself. I opened the folder. Inside were copies. Clean, neat, the kind of paperwork no one argues with for long. I slid the first page forward so it faced the table. This is the car title, my name. Then another. Insurance policy. Also mine. Another phone plan. I paid it every month. Tyler Vaughn's face reddened. You're twisting it. I kept my voice even. This is the storage contract, my signature. Salve. Someone near the back cleared their throat. And this, I said, placing the last set of papers down, is the lease addendum. I co-signed because your credit couldn't. Tyler Vaughn's voice cracked. So what, you helped me? You don't get to yank it all away. I looked at him, then really looked. Not the angry kid, the scared one underneath. I didn't yank anything, I said. I gave notice. I followed the contracts. I stopped paying for things that weren't mine to carry. That's a lie, he shouted. You did it to hurt me. I took a breath. I did it because you stood across a dinner table and called me a loser. And your mother said nothing. Every eye in the room slid to Elaine Parker. She froze for a moment. I almost felt sorry for her. Nearly. Tyler Vaughn spun toward her. Mom. Mom. She opened her mouth, closed it, the same silence she'd given me at Texas Roadhouse. That silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. From the side of the room, Grant Holden, Tyler Vaughn's father, let out a short laugh. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Family business shouldn't be aired like this." I turned to him. "Then maybe family business shouldn't involve opening credit accounts in my name." That did it. The room fell silent. Elaine Parker's head snapped up. "Frank." I slid one more document forward. "This is a store credit account opened without my authorization. And this is another. And a short-term loan, all tied to my information." Tyler Vaughn stared at the papers like they might burst into flames. Grant Holden took a step back. "I don't want any part of that," he muttered. Elaine Parker's voice shook. "You didn't have to bring this here." I gave her a look. "You brought it here the day you chose silence over truth." Tyler Vaughn slammed his fist on the table. "You ruined everything." I didn't raise my voice. "I didn't move closer. I didn't take anything from you," I said. I stopped pretending it was okay to be disrespected. "That's all." The hum of the ceiling fans filled the space. Someone's coffee cup rattled as it was set down too hard. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just saw him. Elaine Parker sank into a chair like her legs had given out. Tyler Vaughn stood there, breathing hard, his story unraveling in front of people he'd wanted sympathy from. I closed the folder and picked it up. "I'm done," I said. "I won't argue about this anymore." I walked out into the cold. The winter air hit my face sharp and clean. My breath fogged in front of me. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders dropped. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Behind me, the door opened. Footsteps hurried. "Frank," Elaine Parker said, her voice cracked. "Wait." I turned. She looked smaller out there, older. "You didn't have to do it like that," she whispered. I met her eyes. I did because quiet didn't work. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at the screen, panic flaring across her face. "It's Tyler Vaughn," she said. "He's got nowhere to go." I nodded once. "I know." As I walked to my truck, my phone buzzed. 2. An incoming call. Elaine Parker. I didn't answer the call right away. I stood by my truck in the church parking lot, cold seeping through the soles of my boots, listening to the phone buzz itself quiet in my hand. The night had dropped fast, Indiana winter doing what it does best, turning breath into fog and thoughts into something sharp. When I finally answered, I didn't say hello. "Frank," Elaine Parker said. Her voice was thin, stretched tight with panic. "You have to come back. He's losing it. He says he's got nowhere to go." I leaned against the side of the Silverado and looked up at the fellowship hall windows, glowing yellow against the dark. People were still inside, still talking, still processing. "I'm not coming back inside," I said. "You can't just leave him like this," she said. "He's your family. He's your family." I closed my eyes for a moment. The word family used to mean something that kept me quiet. Tonight, it meant something else. "I'm not leaving him," I said. "I'm just not rescuing him. I'm just not rescuing him." She sucked in a breath. "What does that even mean?" "It means I'll do what's reasonable," I said. "I'll call a motel and pay for 2 nights. I'll give him the number for a shelter downtown that helps young men get back on their feet. I'll even drive him there if he wants. But I'm not opening my wallet again. Not like before." There was silence on the line. Real silence. Not the kind she used to hide behind. "He needs you," she said finally. I opened the truck door and sat down, the familiar smell of coffee and oil grounding me. "No," I said gently. "He needs to learn how to stand without leaning on someone he doesn't respect." Her voice broke. "And what about me?" I thought about that. About the years of meals eaten in quiet. Of checks written without thanks. Of swallowing words to keep the peace. "I need honesty," I said. "I need to know I'm not being used. And right now, I don't have that with you." She started to cry. Not loud, just enough to let me hear it. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "I know," I said. "And I meant it, but it did." We hung up a minute later. No promises, no shouting. Just the truth. Finally said out loud. I drove home, slow heater, humming radio low. The roads were mostly empty. Fort Wayne always feels smaller at night, like the town is holding its breath. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Porch light on, curtains drawn. But when I stepped inside, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Not the way it should. I packed a duffel bag. Nothing dramatic. Jeans, work shirts, toiletries, the things you need when you're done pretending a place fits. I left Elaine Parker a note on the counter. Short, clear, no blame. I'm staying elsewhere for a while. I need space to think. We'll talk when we're both ready to tell the truth. I drove east past streets I'd driven 1,000 times until the houses thinned out and the river came into view. A small rental sat near the street. Joseph, old, narrow, nothing fancy, but it was quiet. The landlord handed me a key and didn't ask questions. That first night, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the place settle. No TV noise, no footsteps, no phone buzzing with someone else's emergency. The next morning, I woke to sunlight coming through thin curtains. I made coffee in a chipped mug I'd picked up at a thrift store down the road. I took it outside and sat on the small front step, steam rising into the cold air. The river moved slow and steady. It didn't care about arguments or paperwork or pride. It just kept going. For the first time in years, my chest felt light. I thought about Tyler Vaughn, angry, scared, suddenly without a net. I hoped he'd figure it out. I really did. But I also knew that saving him again would only teach him the wrong lesson. I thought about Elaine Parker, about the silence she'd chosen, about the moment in the fellowship hall when it finally turned on her. And I thought about myself, about all the years I'd confused being quiet with being kind. Here's what I learned. Silence can keep the peace. But it can also teach people how to take from you without consequence. Boundaries don't make you cruel. They make you honest. If you're listening to this and you've ever swallowed words to keep things calm, if you've ever paid the price for someone else's comfort, take a moment and ask yourself who's protecting you. If this story felt familiar, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about finding your spine later in life, you know where to find me. My family sneered at my achievement. It's just a cheap award. That night, my name was broadcast live. And the whole room was amazed. My name is Ava Daniels, and my family ignored my achievements for the majority of my life. I made the decision to test that one last time a few weeks ago. In our family group chat, I posted that I had been invited to receive a national award, that the ceremony would be televised live, and that it would be greatly appreciated if they attended or at least watched. I braced myself as I watched the typing bubble flicker. My sister was the first to respond. She referred to the text as a dumb award, laughed, and stated that she would be attending a concert instead. My mother added her voice a moment later. Don't blame us if we don't go. My dad then added the line that has stuck with me, as if my biggest night was some optional errand that I was trying to guilt them into. I went through their messages twice. I didn't argue, I didn't clarify the nature of the award, and I didn't let them know who would be present or how many people would be observing. I simply grinned, typed, "All right," and placed my phone face down on the table. Everything was altered by that choice. Their concert tickets didn't stop what transpired the night of the ceremony. My face filled the screens above their heads as my name was read aloud on live television while they were yelling along to songs. Suddenly, long before my own family truly knew who I was, everyone in their immediate vicinity did. Tell me what time it is for you right now before I tell you what he said and what transpired after I left. And from where are you observing? I'm interested to see how much of this story spreads. Oh, you must know what it was like to grow up in Daniel's home in order to comprehend how all of this could have occurred. We appeared to be just another family living in a peaceful Las Vegas neighborhood on paper. Our roles were actually established long before I was old enough to realize them. Teachers never had to worry about me because I was the child who took care of things. Charlotte Daniels, my older sister, was the center of attention for everyone. The week revolved around Charlotte's schedule, whether she had a game, a rehearsal, or a new obsession. Ethan Daniels, my younger brother, was the child who got away with nearly anything as long as he made people laugh. My mother, Susan Daniels, enjoyed making jokes about having a comedian, a star, and an assistant. Although she didn't mean to be mean, it made it clear where I stood. After a long day at work, my father, Robert Daniels, returned home eager to learn about Charlotte's most recent achievement. I discovered early on that I had to wait until she had finished her stories if I wanted to spend time with him. It began modestly. Charlotte had an upcoming tournament. so a project I was proud of would be neglected. My dad would nod when I brought up a topic from class, then turn to inquire about Charlotte's practice. Everyone turned to Ethan when he offered a joke. People used the time I was speaking to clear plates or refill drinks. There was nothing dramatic enough to call out as unfair. I learned that my news came second through a series of silent decisions. I gave up trying to match Ethan's antics and Charlotte's performances. I took it upon myself to solve issues before others did. I made sure the paperwork was on the table if it needed to be signed. I reset the router in case the internet went down. I reminded my parents when they had appointments. They didn't seem to stare at me as much as they used to when I was more responsible. It was the outcomes, not the creator, that they cherished. Instead of a daughter with her own life, they saw a dependable function. By high school, unless a teacher compelled a parent conference and the praise had to be given to me, I hardly ever bothered to share anything. There was always an audience in Charlotte's world, and she was 2 years older. She was talked about with the kind of enthusiasm that made my parents shine by coaches, choir directors, and even neighbors. They took the lead with Ethan's jokes and Charlotte's most recent performance when a grocery store employee inquired about our family. Normally, I didn't speak up unless someone specifically asked for more. I told myself I didn't require attention. I focused on the one thing I had, finding unobtrusive solutions to problems. I ended up in a field where the work itself was more important than the people doing it. Where I could remain in the background, and let the outcomes do the talking. It fit the version of myself that my family had instilled in me. The one who quietly intervened, made the necessary repairs, and departed before anyone saw them. That's how the years went. The same pattern applied to holidays, birthdays, and family get-togethers. The tone was set by Charlotte's plans. Ethan's charm carried him through. I kept everything going. If I mentioned a victory, it was dismissed as a minor, courteous detail and the attention returned to whatever Charlotte was doing that week. The prospect of receiving the national award did not seem genuine at first. It began with a committee requesting additional details about a project my team had finished via email. After responding to their inquiries, I resumed my work. I took my time telling my parents that I had been shortlisted, even after they sent me another letter. I could already tell how the discussion would proceed. Rather, I kept it to myself as the procedure unfolded. I was asked to explain the significance of our work in lengthy forms, phone calls, and interviews. My boss and colleagues who had personally witnessed the impact were interviewed by members of the organization. Things progressed with each step, but I remained silent at home. While I was in between meetings one afternoon, the formal invitation showed up in my inbox. It specified the ceremony's date, location, and the fact that it would be recorded and televised. I had never seen my name, like it was sitting there, connected to something that was too important to dismiss as a minor personal victory. I spent a lot of time staring at that email. I had something my family could not easily downplay for the first time in years, a moment that would happen whether they liked it or not. It was mine alone for a little while. My work had been subtly transforming my life for years by the time that invitation arrived in my email. A national committee that monitored advancements in public safety received the entire packet after a regional coordinator compiled data from the previous year and created charts illustrating the number of individuals who had accessed care faster. It wasn't until Selma asked me to enter a conference room one afternoon and shut the door that I realized my name was even mentioned. She informed me that every arrow in their documents pointed to me, and that the committee wanted to speak with the person who had created the routing engine's core. She explained that there would be interviews and a lengthy review process, which I would primarily learn about indirectly. I had the old impulse to dismiss it. In my mind, it was still just code, pattern recognition, and me doing the thing that no one else wanted to spend so much time doing. I was not allowed to stay there by Selma. She brought back memories of working overnight shifts and viewing real-time dashboards. Of the time a dispatcher called our on-call number in tears because the new system had moved a crew into position just in time, and of the obstinate bug that had taken a whole weekend to track down. If there was recognition, she said, it would be more about not giving up on a problem until it behaved than it would be about doing some fancy math. Over the following 2 months, the review continued. I had to use straightforward language to explain our work in response to the committee's lists of questions. They requested timelines of calls handled by the new system that were anonymized. On a busy weekend evening, they were curious about the human meaning of an ambulance, arriving a few minutes early. While the decision sat far above us, we at the office continued to handle incidents and ship updates. Instead of picturing the room those people were sitting in with my name on their agenda, it was simpler to concentrate on the upcoming deployment. I had to read the official email twice before it made sense. At the top of the page was a federal agency seal. It informed me that I had been chosen to receive a National Public Safety Innovation Award, that the ceremony would take place in a ballroom of a downtown hotel, and that the show would be filmed and aired as part of a broader event that honored various forms of service. There was a link to a schedule full of security instructions, a brief note about potential media attention, and a line about bringing guests. I kept that information inside our building's walls for a day. I sent my manager and Selma the email. People stopped by my desk and gave me awkward high fives and stunned smiles. The invitation was printed and taped to the refrigerator in the break room. When a camera panned across the row, my team lead made a joke about us rehearsing our posture. The award did not alter who I was, Selma said softly as she squeezed my shoulder. It simply meant that others were being compelled to witness what I had been doing right in front of them. The part about guests only stopped feeling theoretical that night when I was sitting by myself at my kitchen table with the information packet spread out in front of me. A simple sentence appeared in the center of the page. I gazed at those words long enough for the ice in my drink to melt. You may invite up to 5 family members or friends. I imagined that the row that was reserved in my name was empty. Under the neon lights of the strip, I imagined my parents and Charlotte, oblivious to what was going on across town. The way I had handled each previous victory that did not neatly fit their definition of a big deal made me want to keep the entire thing to myself. Whether they understood it or not, the tiniest and most irate part of me wanted them to see this. I had decided by the time the sky over the desert was completely dark. Before I could condense it into something they could disregard, I opened our family chat, composed a thoughtful invitation, and sent it. The ceremony night came sooner than I had anticipated. In the late afternoon, I found myself standing in front of a full-length mirror in a downtown hotel room as a stylist secured the final hem of a dark gown. The formal attire required by the invitation was the type of polished appearance I typically only saw at fundraising galas and news segments. In the dim light of the room, I appeared to be a very different version of myself. People may actually pause and gaze at someone for a brief period of time before continuing. The event was already taking place downstairs. The lobby was transformed into a controlled maze by security badges, check-in tables, and printed programs. Headset-wearing employees circulated among groups of visitors. Every individual there stood for a particular service category: emergency response, infrastructure, education, and public health. In the center of the show, sandwiched between people I had only ever heard about in briefings, was my name. I performed the motions as instructed by the organizers during rehearsal. Get to know the coordinator. Give them your phone for a short while so they can verify your information. Take a quick picture in front of a banner that has too many logos on it. Accept a badge that reads honorary beneath your name. A staff member led you into the ballroom, where silent tripods held cameras. The space seemed unreal. Small cards were placed on each of the round tables that covered the floor. On the far wall was a low stage, with a plain podium in the middle. 3 sizable screens, resembling additional walls above, were prepared to show names, videos, and the live feed that the organizers were constantly discussing. Later, I knew my face would be held by one of those screens. In the rows below it, I also knew exactly who would not be there. Near the center of the room was where our section was seated. Unfazed by the glitter surrounding us, Selma joined me there, a steady presence in a simple black suit. My teammates came in with wide eyes, bumping my shoulder or squeezing my hand as they sat down. The room's noise subsided for a few quiet minutes. All I could feel was the moment's weight bearing down on me from all sides. Officials who had made this type of stage their second home gave speeches at the start of the program. They discussed sacrifice, service, and the unseen labor that kept cities running. Half in the present, half out of it. I listened. I made an effort not to imagine Charlotte and my parents entering. I made an effort not to picture them sliding into the vacant seats next to my coworkers. The message had been sent by me. Their decision had been made. It wasn't about the empty chairs tonight. My focus returned to the room when the emergency services category was mentioned. A brief video that featured dispatchers at consoles, crews navigating traffic, and nighttime satellite photos of city grids was shown on the screens. A narrator gave a thorough, general explanation of what our software did. I felt Selma's elbow touch mine as they said my name once, neutral, and clean. The host then read a description of a routing system that has reduced average ambulance response times throughout the Las Vegas Valley from the card he was holding. When people called for assistance, there was a line about how seconds mattered and how lives could be saved sooner. At last, he called my full name and invited me to the stage. It was like swimming underwater as I made my way to the podium. The cheers rose and blended into a single sound. The crowd's edges were obscured by the stage lights, leaving only flashes and shapes. I accepted a handshake and a glass plaque that glinted in the light from someone whose name I recognized but whose face didn't seem totally genuine. The angle at which I smiled without fully believing it was happening was captured by a photographer. A smaller scene unfolded in the recesses of my mind. Across town at the concert venue, I could practically see my family. As the band concluded a song, they were already seated. I pictured the screens in the concourse flickering between commercials and a brief newscast about the event I was at. Between tour dates and beer commercials, I imagined my own face. On a feed they hadn't bothered to inquire about, my name appeared at the bottom. The remainder of the program went on around me like a movie I had already seen after I moved away from the podium and back to the table. More names, more cheers, and more tales of labor that were typically hidden. My phone, which was silent in my bag, detected the building's signal once more and buzzed once with a notification. My family finally saw the event they had been too busy to attend when another set of screens flickered somewhere else in the city. Soft echoes and clinking glassware filled the ballroom as the program came to an end and the cameras switched off. The screen of my phone lit up with a backlog of notifications that piled up faster than I could clear them as I picked it up from the check-in table and felt it vibrate constantly in my hand. The majority of the alerts met my expectations. Emails from city officials, messages from co-workers, and a lengthy thread from our operations channel with a grainy screenshot of me on stage. Beneath those were a ton of unread texts in the family thread and numerous missed calls from the same 4 numbers. The first burst timestamp coincided exactly with the hour that the concert would have taken a break. I allowed the scroll bar to jump when I opened the chat. My small, silent invitation was seated at the top. Under it, my parents had taken the side of my sister, who had dismissed the award as a useless errand. The tone changed sharply below that. My mother's messages, which described enormous screens over the arena and people turning to stare when my name appeared, ran in nervous blocks. Strangers asking if they were related to me was something my dad had written about. Comments about how amazing everything was and how proud they felt were added. Charlotte's texts appeared to be a performance for an unseen audience because they were shorter, condensed, and filled with exclamation points. I took my time reading each message. They talked about how loud the place was when the ceremony video aired, the questions that arose when my image's caption revealed my job title, and the manner in which fans in the vicinity attempted to take pictures of the broadcast. Nobody brought up the fact that they had opted for a concert rather than simply being present. As if the only thing that mattered was how dramatic the revelation had been, they wrote about shock, pride, and disbelief. An old reflex, the desire to patch things up and cheer everyone up, came back to life for a brief moment. I could practically hear myself typing assurances, outlining the project in layman's terms, and refocusing attention from what they had accomplished to how exciting the future appeared. That version of the conversation replayed itself in my mind as my thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Rather, I lowered the phone and locked the screen. Back at the table, my team was torn between joy and the weariness that comes after a protracted campaign. When Selma saw my face and my hold on the device, she raised an eyebrow. Not ready to unpack it, I shook my head once and allowed myself to be drawn into the evening's minor practical tasks, such as completing the group photo, expressing gratitude to the organizers, and determining which ride-share line to stand in outside the hotel. The city had begun to quiet down by the time I arrived at my apartment. I kicked off my shoes, placed the plaque on the counter, and then opened the phone once more. The number of unread badges had increased. Messages from distant relatives, former classmates, and neighbors from the cul-de-sac where I grew up were posted alongside the family thread. Underneath their notes were links to news clips with captions about how crazy it was to see my face on a night out on the strip. The tone had changed once more in the family conversation. The initial wave's frantic shock had subsided into a more measured form. My mother wanted to know if the local news would be interested in interviewing them about the experience of raising a daughter who was so committed. My father openly questioned whether the city would be interested in hearing about my hometown. Charlotte's messages read like polished nostalgia, drafts for public posts, and assertions that she always knew I was destined for greatness. As though he was attempting to maintain his equilibrium without taking sides, Ethan had included a few dispersed reactions. Before I hit the blank line at the bottom, I scrolled past everything. They would reread everything I wrote there and incorporate it into the narrative they told about us. The difference now was that I realized for the first time that I could control how much access they had to me the world had just met. I took my time typing, proofreading each line before continuing. I didn't say much. Although it was odd to see my face on screens in places I had never been, I admitted that the ceremony had been a significant occasion. I drew a boundary after that. I stated that any story I agreed to tell would center on the work and the people who relied on it, that I would not participate in features about my childhood, and that I did not want interviews framed around our home life. I added that it was painful to see them rush to find ways to profit from something they had so quickly written off. I didn't cite their previous responses. I didn't have to. They were present in the scroll history. And those who had typed them were the ones who were most adamant about ignoring them. I concluded by requesting that they refrain from getting in touch with my colleagues or any other department personnel. I also expressed my hope that they would choose honesty over appearance if a reporter were to approach them. The typing indicator showed up almost instantly after I hit send. It wavered intermittently for a few seconds, as though nobody could quite agree on who should speak first. My mother finally responded in a condensed text block that attempted to address every aspect at once. She maintained that I was overanalyzing as usual, and that they were simply thrilled and proud in their own right. Next was my dad's reply. More trimmed. He wrote that he did not like being made to feel like a villain on a night that should have been a celebration. That they had made many sacrifices over the years, and that I should not tell them how to talk about their own daughter. No paragraph was sent by Charlotte. Instead, she sent a series of messages, each more pointed than the last, accusing me of trying to humiliate them, being unappreciative, and acting as though I had raised myself. Less force was used when they spoke than they might have even a year before. They sounded like echoes from a room I had already left, rather than altering my perception of what had transpired. After reading them, I felt only a weary sort of clarity and waited to see if any part of me wanted to return to the well-known dispute over who had done what for whom. I reopened the email from our communications team after ending the chat without responding. A brief media guide about boundaries, and not feeling compelled to divulge information that unnerved me was attached. There was a line near the end that said it was acceptable to enforce distance and that sometimes the people closest to us were the least ready for public attention. I knew I didn't need to wait for anything to change after reading those words. Here, distance was not a penalty. I was able to select the coordinates for myself. I returned to the family thread one last time and turned it off for a year. I then turned off each person's alerts and opened each conversation window individually. If they sent messages, they would still reach me, but unless I made a different decision, my house would remain silent. It did not feel like a victory lap in the weeks that followed. They resembled a fresh start. The award became a sort of shorthand at work. When new members joined the team, they had to explain why strangers occasionally showed up with cameras. In the hallway, dispatchers stopped me to give me little details that I never saw on a dashboard. Before a seizure got out of control, the child arrived at the hospital. A crew came quickly enough to help an elderly neighbor get back up, saving her from having to spend the night on the floor by herself. Selma took advantage of the publicity to demand more money, more employees, and more obstinate individuals who shared my hatred of unresolved issues. My personal life rearranged itself around more subdued decisions within that momentum. I deleted the family thread from my home screen, but I kept my phone number. I had dinner with friends who had grown to be my coworkers and who were aware of the project's cost and did not require me to downsize it for their comfort. I met with students who came to the department, addressed their inquiries about purpose and burnout, and made it very clear that the work was more important than any headline. Parts of my former life occasionally crept in. My parents had framed a news clipping and hung it in the living room, according to a mutual acquaintance. At neighborhood get-togethers, someone from our street back home would send a direct message claiming that my mom would constantly bring me up. The part where she had skipped the ceremony is now consistently skipped. As if distance were a source of pride, a distant cousin once forwarded a lengthy email my dad had written about raising a daughter who never required much from us. Like I might read a weather report for a city I no longer intended to visit, I read those secondhand updates. I couldn't be harmed by the conditions they described unless I re-entered them. I decided not to. Charlotte took a different approach. She started posting about me online, tagging my account in old pictures and writing heartfelt captions about always believing in my little sister after realizing I wasn't replying in the group chat. For the first time in months, I sent her a direct message, making it very clear that I did not want our relationship to be portrayed that way. If she persisted, I would block her everywhere, and ask the department's legal team to intervene if needed. She took off the tags. She continued to post without mentioning me. In my world, consequences looked like that. Not dramatic encounters or public scenes, but a string of private meetings. My parents couldn't get in touch with me directly, but they could boast to anyone who would listen. Charlotte could make her audience feel nostalgic, But she couldn't change the truth about what had happened. The night they decided that attending a concert was more important than showing up, Ethan could stay on the fence as long as he wanted, but the road back into my everyday life had been blocked. The aspects of my life that I deliberately chose to keep open remained open. I continued working on the subsequent projects and the routing system. I offered to mentor interns who reminded me of the version of myself who used to sit in a bedroom as a child, quietly teaching a computer to listen. I joined a small group that reviewed near misses and made an effort to learn from each one, not because a committee might notice, but because a stranger might be waiting somewhere on the other end of a call. If there is a lesson to be learned from all of this, it is not that public recognition can make up for private neglect or that success can make up for the past. It doesn't do either. When I stopped viewing my family's attention as a reward I had to continuously earn, that's when the real change occurred. I created a life in which those closest to me understood my work, were concerned about its significance, and arrived long before a camera did. Let this be the lesson you learn from my story. Drawing your own lines is permitted. Which invitations are important and which are not is up to you. People who only remember your value when someone else says it to them on a screen are people you are free to leave. When distance keeps you whole, it is not cruel. I appreciate you sticking by me until the very end. After watching this video, take a moment to reflect on your own boundaries, and how you value the people in your life. You may find that someone in your life is still waiting for someone to arrive when there are no lights or applause, doesn't it?